very timely and the more meaningful considering the current circumstances. In North Korea right now, it has poor water resource infrastructure, and thus it is faced with many natural calamities such as flood and drought. It is also faced with dilapidated infrastructure as well as a famine. It's facing difficulty in securing stable water resources. So they are in a dire situation. So North Korea's water issues are no longer issues for North Korea alone to deal with, but in the future, it is an issue for both Koreas to deal with together because we are living on the same peninsula with the North. More importantly, all human beings have the right to use water freely. So this is a non-political and non-military issues that has to be approached based on humanitarian principles. And so I believe that this kind of discussions would lay a strong foundation for such development in the future. K-Water has provided support to various projects for inter-Korean water cooperation. And in the future, as a public entity that is in charge of water resources here in Korea, we will continue to provide such support for cooperation with the North. Today, a symposium hopefully will contribute to enhancing understanding of the North Korean water issues as well as finding ways to support and provide assistance to the North. And your valuable opinion based on your experience and research hopefully will translate into concrete policies, thereby bringing about new changes on the Korean peninsula, particularly with regards to water issues. Lastly, I'd like to thank once again the North Korea Water Society and the Sumcheol University for organizing this event, and we look forward to your leading role in inter-Korean relations in the future. I wish all of you health and happiness. Thank you very much.
Well, we were supposed to have this opening ceremony until 1:30, and the session 1 will start from 1:30. That is our schedule, but rather than having a short break here, we'd like to go straight to the main session. The first session, I'd like to invite chair or moderator of the first session, Professor Hong Sung-ho, to the podium to start session 1. Well, hello, everyone. I am moderator of session 1. My name is Hong Sung-ho, and I'm working at Sumcheol University. Today's weather is a bit chilly, so our intent here is to start early and finish early. We will have 3 speakers for session 1, and the first speaker is Kim Soo-yeon, the former professor of Kim Il-sung University. He or she delivered a presentation on the life and water of Pyongyang residents. After graduating from Kim Il-sung University, this person has come to South Korea a few years ago, and he is working at the Korean Peninsula Strategy Center right now. And he has a deep knowledge about North Korean people and their life. Please give a big round of applause to our first speaker.
Today I will be talking about the life of the Pyongyang people and the importance of water. My name is Kim Soo-yeon. Water, regardless of region or country, is a basic necessity to all living things, including mankind. Water is a necessity. It comprises most part of the body, and having access to clean, abundant water is actually a basic human right. However, if you look at the situation that the Pyongyang people are faced with right now, in terms of their access to clean and abundant water, they are not enjoying this right. They are experiencing a lot of inconvenience up to today with regards to the use of water resources. And so, North Korea's drinking water resources problem is very serious and dire, which is a generally known fact. However, for Pyongyang, relatively speaking, Pyongyang is a city that is doing better than other regions in North Korea. So you might think that the water situation is much better for the residents in Pyongyang. So that is what I'd like to talk about today. That is why I decided to speak about the life of the Pyongyang residents and their water usage. Since 1990s, when the Eastern European Socialist bloc had collapsed, North Korea had experienced the arduous march, and since then, they have had poor maintenance and repair for the waterworks, water supply facilities, and there's been a lot of backwardness and retreat in their infrastructure. And so among the North Korean people, they really wanted 3 R's. 3 R's here refers to the following. What are they? Water, fire, and rice. So you will see that all 3 includes the R in the terminology. So for the North Korean people, water, fire, rice was a hope of a lifetime. And so you will see that water is also included as one of the important hopes of the Pyongyang people. So for the Pyongyang residents, in fact, they are suffering from lack of water in their daily lives. So let me talk about the details of that. In Pyongyang, well, of course, they do have water supply facilities, basically. So they do have access to the water supply system, the faucets. However, in terms of the actual provision or distribution of water, even if you're living in a condominium, the residents have access to 1 hour of tap water each in the morning and in the evening. So when I was living in Pyongyang, for example, in my condominium, so our tap water supply hour was from 6 to 7 in the morning. But of course, there are problems that arise. And so there are cases when the tap water would not come out at 5 or 6 in the morning. For the housewives, for example, it was very important for them to receive or fill up their buckets early in the morning, but they have to go to work as well. Their family members have to go to work, and so they would leave the tap water faucet open, and they would have to leave their homes. Sometimes then the water supply would begin at 10 or 11 in the morning. So what happens is that there will be overflow of water. Their house floors would all be wet. And I did experience it myself, because from the ceiling of our house we had water dripping down, and we thought it was a natural calamity. We went upstairs and checked, and we found out that the family had left the faucet open when they left home. And so we had to deal with the damage from the water overflow at that time. But in the winter times, for example, particularly the case of Pyongyang and in North Korea generally, they have very low voltage supply. Many North Koreans have to use the electric devices, electronic equipment to provide heat. And so even if the schedule is that water supply will come at 5 to 6 in the morning, more often than not, during winter times, they are not able to receive water through their faucet. And so they would have to go to huge tanks to transport the water in buckets. As you can see in this photo, in Pyongyang City, there are a lot of high-rise condominiums or apartments. So if you're living on the 15th, 16th floor, just imagine having to go to the first floor to get water from the tank and then to transport that all the way up to your house. So for some apartments or condominiums, that is why they say the most popular floor would be the middle part of the apartment. In the case of South Korea, it's the penthouse, the topmost floor that is most popular. But in Pyongyang, the 7th or the 8th floor would be most popular. Because when you're living on the 7th or the 8th floor, you get a good view, and even if you don't have tap water from your faucet, you can at least carry the water buckets from the first floor relatively easily compared to living in the higher floors. So those are the inconveniences that the Pyongyang people are experiencing in their daily lives as a result of water shortage. So in talking about water shortage in Pyongyang, we do have to talk about the use of the laundry machine. So generally speaking, laundry machine was considered as an innovative invention which reduced house chores in different countries, and this was the same for North Korea as well. Particularly, it encouraged the women to go out into society and work because they could make use of the laundry machines. And so from the 1990s, we've seen that there was an increase in the use of laundry machines, particularly from the 1990s. During the arduous march, there were some private laundry shops that had opened because the public laundry shops run by the government had to close down. So from the 1990s, we had the introduction of some market principles, market trading, and so the so-called dry cleaning shops or the chemical laundry shops, which are private laundry stores, had opened in the 1990s. So that was the trend that we had seen from the 1990s. So if you had the money, a lot of the housewives would bring the clothes to these private laundry shops for dry cleaning services. From year 2000 onwards, in Pyongyang and in many other cities, there's been a spike in the use of laundry machines. And in fact, for marriage furnishings, a laundry machine was a must as part of marriage. And so in North Korea, there was a saying that you have to have a laundry machine included as part of the marriage furnishings that you prepare for you to be considered well off. So 오장육기 is the expression that they had used. So the yukgi here refers to 6 types of different electronic machines, which includes the laundry machine. In the ojang, these are the 5 cabinets, would include the bedding and the clothes cabinet, as well as other electronic equipment, TVs, refrigerator, and laundry machine, and others. And so the significance of the laundry machine in North Korea was that it enhanced the quality of life and it symbolized wealth. For the wealthy, when they went overseas, they would come back from overseas business trips with gifts to their wives. And the most popular gift was the laundry machine. For diplomats, for example, or other wealthy officials, they would go overseas, and when they come back, they would bring European-made laundry machines, which was most popular. Why is it not South Korean-made laundry machine? Well, it wasn't very safe for the houses to use South Korean-made appliances because there was continuous censure activities that went on, and they were subject of or objects of control. And so for laundry machines, the most popular ones were European-made. And for the general public, who were sort of the middle class, they would buy China or Chinese-made laundry machines. But just because you have a laundry machine doesn't mean that you can use it, because you would need to have electricity as well as water to be able to use the machine. In Pyongyang, electricity or power supply is somewhat stable. However, the issue lies with water supply. For Pyongyang residents, when they move into apartments, the first construction work that they do in their home is to install water tanks with a capacity of 1 ton or more in their restrooms, because they want to connect to that water tank to the laundry machine for its stable use. So next slide, please. Now I'd like to talk about the severity of water pollution in North. So since the arduous march, we have seen that the waterworks penetration rate has been improving slightly, but in many cases, a lot of the people still do not have access to clean and sanitary water use. And if you look at the water quality, sometimes it's muddy, some water has worms, it's very turbid, and it smells of disinfectant oftentimes. And so all of the residents in Pyongyang will have to boil their water. They cannot drink off of their tap. But when you try to boil water, what will be a problem in Pyongyang? Most of the times the fuel sources would be petroleum or gas, but there is a rationing of gas and petroleum for fuel. There's a rationing system in North Korea, but honestly, it's not enough for the entire family to use over a month. And so what they lack in terms of fuel, they would have to buy in the market. In the case of the LPG gas barrels, 1 kilogram barrel would cost about $40 to $50 in Pyongyang markets. So for the general public who earn much less than that amount, they cannot imagine buying the LPG gas barrels from the market. So it's very difficult for them to access fuel, but they still have to drink water, and so they find it difficult to find fuel for boiling water to drink. And the PowerPoint, could you go to the PowerPoint slide that's one page earlier? So you will see that these are so-called non-powered boilers that the Pyongyang residents use. These are non-powered boilers that are being sold by the manufacturer, and you will see that they're quite popular among the Pyongyang residents. These kinds of non-powered boilers use coal for boiling water to provide heating, and so these non-powered boilers are actually used quite often during winter in Pyongyang, and this is also used for boiling water, for cooking as well. But these kinds of boilers actually uses coal as fuel, and the installation would be, these would be installed mostly in the kitchen or in the veranda, and it produces a lot of harmful chemical or pollution. So it's not very safe. And there are also environmental regulations in Pyongyang. So for certain public buildings, the use of these non-powered boilers are banned. And also another way that the residents boil water for drinking is to use electricity. At our house also, we use electricity most often to boil water. But for electricity supply also, in the case of Pyongyang, since the mid-2000s, there were attempts to install watt-hour meters. And the state obviously could not install or provide all of the watt-hour meters necessary, but each house would have to pay about $30 to have these meters installed by the government. And so the uptake rate was quite low as a result. It was very expensive. It wasn't free, it was very expensive, and so many residents could not afford to install these watt-hour meters. So what the government or the North Korea regime had said was that if you install these meters, then we will give you a discount on the electricity tariff that you have to pay. And so that incentive led to more residents to try to install the watt-hour meters. And so for the residents, they saw this incentives of the meter checking people. They were actually those people in charge of censures in each home, and so they would not be visiting the homes if the watt-hour meters were installed. And so this brought about a high rate in the installation of these meters. So there is an electricity planning system that the North Korean government had instituted, which was based on the number of household members. So for each member, there's a quota of the amount of electricity that can be utilized in a household. And so if you surpass that set amount of electricity, you would be subject to progressive tax. And if North Korean residents would have to pay this progressive tax, it will be as expensive as what you pay in South Korea, for example. And so this integrated meters were installed illegally, and sometimes there was illegal electricity that was used by the households. And this led to a lot of electricity or power accidents, which caused more social problems in North Korea. So in Pyongyang, for the high-ranking officials or the wealthy, they decided to buy mineral water, bottled water, or spring water for drinking. In North Korea, what's most popular right now are the natural small molecule bottled waters. So you will see the chemical constitution of these spring water compared to the regular bottled water. Because these are comprised of very small molecules, it has very good absorption levels by the body. And there's also very popular spring water called the Kanso spring water. And there's a story behind this Kanso spring water supply. There was a farmer who saw that a crane had hurt itself, and the crane had drunk from the spring water and was healed of the injury and flew back to heaven. And so this farmer saw that there was a spring here, and the water was very refreshing, and that is the Kanso spring water. And that story is very popular among the Pyongyang residents right now. And so this is good for your veins, for liver, for healing a lot of different diseases. And so it's quite popular among the Pyongyang residents. Up until the 1980s, the residents were able to access the Kanso spring water and Sindok spring water very easily. However, in 1989, the 13th World Youth Student Festival was held, and since then they understood that selling or exporting these mineral water overseas would be a good source of income for the regime. And so there was the Sindok spring water factory that was operated, which became quite popular among the foreign residents in North Korea. So in Ningna-do, this Sindok spring water factory, the Koryo Dongyang spring water factory, and the Yongaksan factory were constructed. And for spring water or bottled water companies, several were established, such as Ningna, Dongyang, and Joseon Gwangcheonsu Company, and they manufactured these bottled waters to export to China and many Southeast Asian countries. So you will see here on the photo that the spring water and mineral water has been bottled for export. For North Korea, under the Kim Jong-un regime, you will see on the photo the Ryongaksan spring water factory. This is being visited by Kim Jong-un. And from the construction phase, the purpose of the factory was stated that it would provide spring water or bottled water to the Pyongyang residents exclusively. And the Ryongaksan is actually called the Mount Kumgang of Pyongyang. So it produces a very good spring water. And so as you can see on the photo, in 2016, Kim Jong-un personally visited the factory and ordered the twofold increase in spring water production. In other words, he ordered more supply of the spring water to the Pyongyang residents. So if you look at the media reports coming out from North Korea recently, as you can see on the bottom, there is the Kanso spring water shop, and there are many of these shops in the streets of Pyongyang. And above that is the biggest department store in Pyongyang selling the spring water. So if this is the case, why is it that North Korea is showing much interest or trying to promote the production of mineral water and spring water under the Kim Jong-un regime? We can confirm the reason behind this increase in supply through the statements that Kim Jong-un has made. So in 2016, Kim Jong-un had declared that the Kanso spring water factory normalization production is an important project that shows the superiority of the socialist system. Generally speaking, it's actually quite expensive to buy these bottled waters because 1 liter of the spring water would cost about 1,000 to 1,300 won. And so this would amount to a whole month's salary for the regular citizens of North Korea. And so it's very difficult to actually buy these spring water, bottled waters in the first place. And so this was considered as a symbol of wealth in North Korea. So the water that we freely drink here in South Korea. I mean, water, people, you see it everywhere. It's not considered an important issue, but in the case of North Korea, this kind of spring water is called a symbol of wealth. And in Pyongyang, so the way to determine which household is a wealthy household or is a high official household, if you want to check that, you can just see households that receive spring water, bottled water delivery, and you would know that that will be a wealthy family. Next page, please. So, of course, in Pyongyang, there continues to be limited water supply, and the poor quality of water as well as poor water supply shows that there is chronic economic difficulties, lack of investments in the dilapidated infrastructure, there is continuous power shortage, as well as wrong perceptions about infrastructure in the country. So right now, the wells, the underground water systems are very polluted, particularly in the mining areas. In the factory areas, there is a severe water pollution. I used to work at a trading company in North Korea, and Yangdo, Seongcheon, Haeju. I mean, this company had a lot of the mining zones in these areas. And so if you look at some examples, as you can see here on the map, these are the locations of the major mines in North Korea. And aside from these, there are smaller mines as well, and I'm just showing you the major ones here. If you look at the huge mines, so what they do is do wet tailing processes as part of the mining process. And then they would use gravity separation techniques and then do flotation or dressing and other processes utilized to produce concentrates. And so in that process, there's a lot of wastewater tailings that is just simply flown out to the rivers and the streams. But of course, there are some regulatory agencies that are trying to work to check whether there is illegal outflow of these wastewaters by the factories or the mining sites. But then oftentimes, the regulatory agencies would just overlook or look away with regards to the pollution problems. And so this led to a lot of pollution problems. However, the more urgent task was to earn money to export, to produce and to export these concentrates. And this has led to a huge pollution problem, particularly in the mining areas and the factory areas in the country. And so in the case of North Korea, well, yes, they do have Environmental Protection Act, Public Sanitation Act, River Act, Taedonggang Pollution Prevention Act, the Suez Act, and the City Management Act, Waterworks Act, and the Sewage or Sewerage Act. So they have enacted these laws, but implementation or enforcement is a whole different issue. So, for example, the Taedonggang River is a major water source in North Korea, but it has very severe pollution problems. And sometimes just drinking water from tap leads to a lot of stomach problems and ailments. And oftentimes, the fishermen who fish in the Taedong River would suffer from the fish pollution as a result. So I think it's time for me to conclude. So in terms of water quality problems in North Korea, It's of course a severe problem, but this problem is not limited to just the north. It also affects South Korea, which is connected on the Korean Peninsula. And the poor water quality in North Korea leads to many diseases and other related problems. And so if we try to assist the north manage these issues right now, that's going to lead to huge unification cost savings in the future. And so I think we already have to begin with active response, inter-Korean cooperation on North Korean water issues to prepare for future eventual unification. Water is a basic necessity. It is directly linked to life and the survival of humanity, and so we really look forward to the day when the North Korean water issues will be resolved quickly. With this, I will conclude my presentation. Yes, thank you very much. So Professor Kim talked about the life of the Pyongyang residents with regards to water resources as well as the way forward in terms of future cooperation. Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to invite Kim Jin-min, the K-Water Director for the next president. He will deliver a presentation on water usage in North Korea and ways for collaboration. Right now, he is in charge of leading their projects with North Korea. I would like to give him the floor. Well, good afternoon. My name is Kim Jin-min, and I'm working at K-Water. K-Water is the English name of this Water Resources Management Corporation of Korea. Right now, I'm not doing any projects related to North Korea, but during 2018, before the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, I had this 3-year project with North Korea to develop or protect water resources in North Korea. And based on that experience, I'd like to give you a presentation for about 25 minutes. Can we have the slideshow? So my presentation topic is water usage in North Korea and ways for collaboration. For 3 years, when I did this project with North Korea, I looked at the North Korea maps more than the maps of South Korea. So I remembered all the names of rivers and streams of North Korea. And Professor Kim Soo-yeon told you her direct experience with regard to North Korea's water usage and water resources. I like such direct experience, but I have many materials like the satellite images and the anecdotes that I've gathered from North Korean residents and the data that we have gathered about North Korea's water resources. These visual images will help you enhance your understanding about North Korea's water resources. Should I flip to the next slide? Should I be the one? Well, this is a comparison between water resources of North Korea and South Korea. As you can see, the rainfall or precipitation is less in North Korea, but North Korea has bigger land. So the total water resources amount is very similar, but if you look at the per capita water resources, North Korea's population is way less, so per capita water resources is higher in North Korea. So whenever we gather data, we look at these differences. And in the near future, I hope that the K-Water can be able to produce these kind of maps that show the rainfall or the average rainfall of the entire Korean Peninsula. So the North Korea's water resources shortfall issues have been well dealt with the explanation of Professor Kim Soo-yeon. North Korea has severe water issues. You know them very well. As you can see that the North Korea also lack dams, and all of the dams they have built are being used for hydroelectricity power generation. So these dams are mainly or mostly for power generation, and the water supply is severely lacking. They say there's a 65%, but I don't know exactly the rate of water supply for the North Korean residents, and they are very susceptible to floods or droughts, and because they lack the power, they cannot treat water properly, which leads to higher incidence of waterborne diseases. Next slide. So these pictures will show you the damage of floods. You can see the pictures in 2006 or 2007 when there were severe floods, when there's heavy rainfall. Sometimes the villages near downstream, they are just wiped out. As you can see, landslide. You can see severe landslide after heavy rain, and the sands that were wiped from mountains, they just inundate the villages at the downstream of the rivers. And this is images from 2020. 2020 is the year when the Korean Peninsula had severe floods. And after Kim Jong-un took power in 2011, this is the most severe flood in North Korea. The international society reached out, but North Korea refused any help. And as you can see on the left side, you can see the Pyongyang city, which was inundated by the heavy rainfall. And on the right side, these are the very important picture. This is the upstream of Injin River, and at this upstream, there is this Dongneo, the oldest dam that was built by the Japanese colonial government. And the structure was damaged during the 2020 flood, and this has discharged so much water. And I believe this damage to Bongnaeho Dam has caused much more damage to the villages nearby. So I mentioned the floods, but the water supply is also very severe and serious issue in North Korea. Professor Kim already provided the details. They have very dilapidated waterworks, and they don't have power to supply water, and they have this limited time for water supply even in Pyongyang. And the rural areas and the smaller cities, they have more serious water supply issues. And I think that these statistics are quite accurate. They have this only 35% water supply that reaches the households. If we supply 100% water at the central water supply station, and only 35% of it actually reaches households. This is a very severely low rate. And when they just supply water and disconnect the supply and they resume the supply, then the dirt or the alien matters that fill the waterworks pipes will be just flown into the water supply, so the residents had to receive very polluted water. Many people are curious to know the waterworks system of North Korea and other sewage system. We can see or guess the state of North Korea's development from the satellite image, but this is very hard to get. You can see the water supply system at the Taedong River, upstream of Taedong River, and you can see the three wells. They just don't take water from rivers. They use water in the wells and use disinfectants. And even though they have this water purification system, all of the system or facilities are underground. So it is very difficult for us to have the exact understanding of North Korea's waterworks system. And on the right side, you can see the water supply system of South Korea, and you can see the clear contrast between North and South Korea. And especially, we don't know exactly the water piping system of North Korea. Since we are technicians, we can know the status, but we heard that even the water experts in North Korea do not have a clear understanding about their own system because of the security issues. They do not provide data even to their own experts. And Professor Kim mentioned that water supply is limited to certain times in North Korea, and these are statistics that we obtained 10 years ago. As you can see from the left side, this is a city of 300,000, and on the right-hand table would show you the cities of 100,000. So only 3% of the households in the cities, they get a water supply once in a day, and majority of the households would just receive water supply once in every 3 days. And on the right side, you can see these smaller cities, they receive water supply only once or twice per week. So Pyongyang is the city which receives the water supply most often. So Pyongyang is relatively well-off city, so it is receiving most water supply. If you go to other cities, the situation is more dire. Now, this is in North Korea's water management project. North Korea is trying to develop some water dam projects right now, and they also have the potable water projects. And since we are having this symposium in Paju, which is very closer to North Korea, I'll also give you some other information about the inter-Korean water project or potential inter-Korean water project. So this is how North Korea is trying to develop its hydroelectric project. It is moving water to other areas by constructing tunnel or waterworks. They developed this water flowing route so that they can guide water into the areas that they want to give more water. So they have developed some power generation stations in those areas, and they built some water tunnels so that they can move water to the areas where power stations are located. So all of the rainfall can go through the power generation stations. This is how they can continue their power generation with very limited water resources. They have very large-sized water power generators, and then they gather all of these water resources in the nearby region. And by doing so, they are building more dams for power generation. And one case and example is Orangcheon hydroelectric power station. You can see this very big dam at the center, and they gather all of the water nearby into this water route marked with red. And then with this gathered water, they generate power. And this project is Tancheon, the hydropower station. Even though it is not well known in South Korea, its size is huge, and it just takes water in Amnok River. And this tunnel is 66 kilometers in length, And from the upstream, it has this water tunnel of 66 kilometers that is connected to the East Sea. And about 1/3 of Hamnok River, it just goes through this tunnel to reach this power station. Its capacity is 500 megawatt, and our Chungju Dam is 400 megawatt. And in South Korea's case, the Chungju Dam is not entirely used for power generation, but in North Korea, 60% of its power comes from hydroelectric power. So this dam is used for power generation 24/7, so its generation will be much bigger than that of our Chungju Dam. And this is a stair-type reservoir. Gunjin River is located in South Hamgyong province, and they are building dams like step stairways. As you can see, the length is 26 kilometers. So, at a step-like fashion, the dams are being built for hydroelectric power, and if necessary, they build more tunnels for more power generation. And so if you go to the main big streams, then there's no water flowing because they are just gathering water from all of the nearby regions just for power generation. And the situation is worse here. They take all of the Amlok River to Yongnim Reservoir. They have this big dam in Yongnim Reservoir, and then they have this water tunnel of 80 kilometers. And they have this 12 dams along these 80 kilometer tunnels for power generation. This is all full power, and since when reservoir is filled constantly, they can use the water for farming. Next. And I mentioned how North Korea is using dams, and the second part is about farming water. During the Japanese colonial rule, I think there must have been more pumping stations in the northern part of North Korea. But since they lack power, they cannot use these pumping stations. So they just use this natural water flow by using gravity. So instead of using power, they are using gravity to save power. And this system was constructed in the 2020, and the total length of these waterworks is 80 kilometers. And it takes water from Dendong River and the Injin River as well. And through the water pipes, I think this is just 10 kilometers with just a modicum of power. You can just send this water 10 kilometers. But North Korea, they built this 20 or 30 kilometers of water pipes because they cannot use power. So they, with just the gravity, they are sending this water 10 kilometers by building 20 or 30 kilometers water pipes. Next is about the water supply for drinking water. North Korea is doing some repair works and some improvement works. They are making some efforts, but the improvement is not so significant. And next is about the Inter-Korean Dam project. K-Water is taking a closer look at water resources, but there are so many shared water resources between North and South Korea, and this Hwangnam Dam or Innam Dam and this Dam of Peace in South Korea. These are the dams that were built in the streams or rivers that North and South Koreas are sharing. So for the Innam Dam and the Hwangdang Dam are the dams of North Korea that have been built in the rivers that flow to South Korea. Please move on to the next page. Yes. So this is how much we know about North Korean dams. They have these two dams in the rivers that are connected to South Korea. But these dams, many people believe these dams are to attack South Korea with water, but I don't think they have such malicious intent. And let me just give you some information about these dams, why they have built these dams in these rivers. There are three flows of water. With regard to these dams, they have these main three flows of water from Han River and Yeseong River, and apart from that, they have built three tunnels, and these tunnels will send water to East Sea and Yeseong River. This means that North Korea is trying to move the flow of water to meet their needs, and they have these five power station, Kunmin power station. This means that those power stations have been built jointly by the military and civilian sector. When we talk about the water resources, we first look at issues or problems. These Dam of Peace or the Gunnam Dam. These are the dams that we have in rivers that are connected to North Korea. As far as these connected rivers, we have serious issues like the unnoticed water discharge from North Korea and resulting floods or droughts. Why North Korea is having so poor management of water flow? First of all, they lack power, and the second is they lack water for farming. This is the west side of Imjin River, Yeseong River, and Daedong River, and to the south there is Haju area. Haju area has Yeonbyeon plain or Yeonbyeon rice field that is producing much of the rice consumed by North Korea. So North Korea is moving water to Yeonbyeon plain, and all of the water is just taken to provide water to this Yeonbyeon plain. But compared to Yeonbyeon plain, our paddy field in the nearby area is much smaller. So North Korea doesn't have enough water to provide or to flow down to South Korea because they have to supply themselves for power and farming in this Yeonbyeon plain. So next part is about the inter-Korean collaboration or potential projects. When it comes to railroads and roads, there is intergovernment discussion or negotiation, but I know that those negotiations do not go smoothly under the international sanctions. So we have to bear international sanctions in mind when we talk about inter-Korean projects, and we have to start projects small in areas where it is possible. And COVID-19 also reduced the inter-Korean exchanges or the opportunities for the experts into Korea to meet together for discussion. So we have to focus on the higher priorities like the providing potable or drinking water to North Korean people. And we have to resume some of the inter-Korean talks that have happened before. The inter-Korean project requires the collaboration from the North Korean side. Even though the intent is good, if North Korea does not show any response, then we cannot go anywhere. When we have a project, if there is a government approval, we can just proceed with this approval. But when it comes to inter-Korean project, we also need North Korean regime's response and North Korean regime's approval. Therefore, it is very imperative for us to know the needs and demands of North Korea. So to do so, we need to meet the experts or the people from North Korea to research or study their needs. So these are the 4 areas that we have to focus on. And I think that the third one, encouraging North Korea to join Asia Water Committee. If North Korea joins AWC, then our approach will be more facilitated. As for potable water, I think that humanitarian approach will be very feasible. In these water purification facilities, they can be installed in the vulnerable areas where, like schools or kindergartens, if we can just provide these purification facilities, so that it will make the negotiation process easier, and these purification facilities will be very effective, well priced, and will be very conducive to North Korea's water supply situation. So this is a very high potential proposal for North Korea. And if there is any natural disaster, then we can provide various potable purification trucks. And we can also provide disinfectants to the inundated areas. These can be good ideas. And the Professor Kim mentioned worms in the water. So to address such an issue, we can just send a disinfectant to help North Korean people provide drinking water. And this is the image taken when the President Moon visited the Gunnam Dam area. When you go to Imjin River, there's this very big dike, a very super big dike in the Imjin River, and the water there is just 30 centimeters deep. This shows that North Korea has a very severe lack of water resources. So just notifying rainwater or notifying the water situation could be a good alternative, and this was proposed by the South Korean president to North Korea to better manage water resources between the two Koreas. K-Water is in charge of managing water in the Dam of Peace. So this is also high priority area. When North Korea discharge water, they have to make a prior notice, and it is not related to international sanction. They can just do this right away to help South Korea better respond or better be prepared for water discharge from North Korea. So in this area, we need to encourage North Korea to do so. It is up to North Korean regime's will. And in other areas, depending on situation, we can just accelerate the process. And this is the last part. I put in this prospective word here because we are not sure about how progress will be made in this area. North Korea has this serious infrastructure issue when it comes to water management. Its reservoirs are all very aged, and they those dams do not have sluice gates. All of the recent dams, they do not have water gates. This means that they cannot control water flow. They just hold water in for power generation. That is why they have this very inefficient management of these dams. And most of the dams in North Korea can be maintained only for 50 or 100 years. So if they go over 50 to 100 years ago, their dams would not work compared to the 200 years of dams in South Korea. And even though their dams and reservoirs are very big, all of the water is just used for power supply. That is why they have the sufficient level of power supply only in the summer. And for better water management, they have to send some of the water to the downstream, but because of the farming water, they cannot send the water. That is why they have this very low power supply in spring and autumn. So we have to take a closer look at the current status of North Korea's dam management to help North Korea to better manage their water resources. This is all I have prepared for presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. You have just given us information about North Korea's water resources and the dams and how they are managing their water resources and potential areas of inter-Korean collaboration. Now I'd like to move on to the third speaker of session 1.
The speaker is Professor Jan Vymazal from the Czech University of Life Sciences in Czech Republic. He'll be speaking on constructed wetlands for wastewater treatment. Professor Vymazal has been working with constructed wetlands since the late 1980s, focusing on removal of organics, including micropollutants, nutrients, heavy metals, and compartmentalization of these pollutants in the plants. So, Professor, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. It's a very early morning in Prague. Just a question, can you see my presentation and can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see you, then we can hear you very well.
Yes, so my talk is on constructed wetlands for wastewater treatment, and I think that this wastewater treatment technology could be very useful because in most cases it doesn't require any electricity. So I think it's important to say that constructed wetlands are engineered systems. However, they use the exactly same processes which occur in natural wetlands. That's why we can use the knowledge we know from natural wetlands to use it for water treatment. Of course, I said that the constructed wetlands are using natural processes. However, they are designed to create the conditions for water treatment in more controlled environment. There were many attempts in the past to use natural wetlands. However, these attempts were usually not successful because you do not have too much space or room for to vary this process. You have a given plans, given size, given flow, so constructed wetlands are much more better. These wetlands, these constructed wetlands were developed in Germany in the 1950s. However, over the years they spread across the world very efficiently. You can find many different classifications of constructed wetlands, so here is one of those, and they can be classified according to plants which are used. That means like free-floating plants, floating leaf plants, emergent plants, or submerged. And I will show you examples of each of these systems. However, I think that the most important classification is according the absence or presence of the water on the surface. And therefore, we have two major types, so-called surface flow constructed wetlands, which sometimes are also called free water surface, FWS systems, or subsurface flow systems. The subsurface flow systems can be further divided according to the direction of flow, to vertical flow and horizontal flow. And there is one very important difference in between these two systems. While horizontal flow systems are continuously flat, okay.
Yeah, now we can see the file. Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
So here is the structure how we can
Look good. Yeah.
classify constructed wetlands. So I was telling that we can use different types of plants and also the absence or presence of the water on the surface. And the subsurface flow can be further divided according the direction of flow to vertical flow and horizontal flow. And horizontal flow systems are continuously flat. That means that the filtration material is continuously submerged with water. So those systems are predominantly anoxic or even sometimes anaerobic. While vertical flow systems are fed intermittently on the surface. That means that for a certain period of time, these wetlands are empty and the oxygen can diffuse in the system, and these systems are predominantly aerobic. If we combine these two systems, we can have so-called hybrid constructed wetlands, which are mostly combination of vertical and horizontal flow. However, we can combine any other types of constructed wetlands. And now I will show you the examples because...
I'm sorry to interrupt you again. So would you enlarge the file so we can see a little bit better? You can enlarge, yes, better, getting better, yeah.
Yeah, so
yes. Thank you very much.
So finally we got online. So here are the simple drawings of these systems. So on top you can see the surface flow wetlands, which are, I would say, a very densely vegetated ponds, and the treatment processes, they mostly occur in the water column. Then below that is a so-called subsurface horizontal flow, where the water is fed in the one side and flows horizontally below the surface. And at the end, on the principle of connected vessels, we can actually maintain the water level in the filtration bag. The vertical flow systems are the third option, and we can feed intermittently the water on the surface. The water percolates by gravity to the bottom and is leaving the system. And in between the batches, the oxygen can diffuse into the filtration material, so it gets mostly anaerobic. Recently, so-called floating treatment wetlands have been introduced as well, because it's well known that many so-called emergent plants can float. It may happen under natural conditions easily. So we create some ponds where the plants are fixed in structures which are made of wood or styrofoam or any other plastics, so the plants can flow. And we will see now examples of these various types of constructed wetlands. So in general, we can say that at the moment, constructed wetlands can be used for treatment of wide variety of wastewaters. In the very beginning, in the 1950s and 1960s, constructed wetlands were mostly used to treat municipal sewage. However, over the years, there is a very wide usage also for agricultural wastewaters, including dairy, poultry, cattle, swine, and more recently also for agriculture, for aquacultures, because aquacultures now are using, they recycle the water, so there is necessity to treat the water before it gets back into the system. There is also a wide range of industrial wastewaters like mine drainage, especially from coal mining. There is a wide variety for food processing wastewaters. Those are wastewaters which are very high in organics, so they have very high concentrations of organics, but usually very well degradable, like sugars and alcohols. And also, maybe surprisingly, constructed wetlands can be used for wastewaters from heavy industry, such oil refineries or fertilizers or pulp and paper, and recently also for, let's say, tannery wastewaters also. There is also very common use to treat stormwater runoff from various environments. It could be from urban environment, that means from streets or highways, also airports, and this is usually in colder climates because, you know, during the winter there is a lot of de-icing and defreezing liquids used in the airports. So we can use constructed wetlands for that. It's also a lot of constructed wetlands built to treat agriculture runoff and drainage, and also from greenhouses of nursery. There is also use for landfill leachate treatment, because landfill leachate is very difficult wastewater, very difficult to treat, but constructed wetlands seems to be a very good option, and also for sludge, usually activated sludge dewatering and stabilization. So we start a very short tour through the system. So this is the constructed wetlands with free water surface, and as I mentioned in the beginning, we can use various plants. There are two major plants which are used in these systems, and the first is water hyacinth, Achornea crassipes, very noxious weed in subtropics and especially tropics. This plant is not native to temperate and cold climate because it doesn't survive during winter. This plant has a very fast and vigorous growth. It covers a lot of water bodies and even rivers and canals in the tropics, and that was the major fact which was considered as beneficial in wastewater treatment. And in the 1970s and early 1980s, there were many attempts to use this plant. And here is the one example from my colleague from Thailand. You can see the very extensive growth, and the only way how you can prevent the growth is to make some mechanical barrier. The major problem of this system is that you have to continuously harvest the plants, because otherwise the plants, they don't have space to grow. And unfortunately, there is not much use for water hyacinth. So there is a tremendous amount of waste nobody wants to deal with. And therefore, these systems are not used so frequently because of the maintenance and operation problems. Very similar systems are those which are used in duckweed. Lemnaceae, it is a worldwide growing plant. It grows even in the very cold climate. It sometimes survives under the ice. And you can see on the left side there is a typical picture from a eutrophic pond from the Czech Republic, but it could be elsewhere as well. And in the picture on the left side at the bottom, you can see what happens when the wind is blowing. Means the plants are pushed on one side However, if we want to use them for wastewater treatment, it's always necessary to keep the plants on the surface. And next figure shows the option how we can do so. It means that we can create these kind of structures which keep the plants on the surface. And also you can see the harvester. Those plants also grow very fast, so you have to keep on harvesting, and there the maintenance and operation gets very expensive because you have to harvest it nearly every day. However, those systems can be used. Also, the duckweed can be used. Also, the name duckweed could be used as a fodder for animals. However, as I said, the constructed wetlands are very handy because they do not use any electricity, and the operation and maintenance is very easy. However, when you have to keep on harvesting, it makes the operation more expensive. Another types of plants are those so-called with floating leaf. Those are plants which usually have very big rhizomes in the soil, and leaves are floating on the surface of the water. Those are usually water lilies type plants like Nymphea, water lily, or Nufar, or in Asia, Nelumbo nucifera. And the next picture shows one of the very large systems. This is a tertiary treatment for the city of Orlando in Florida, US, for 800,000 population equivalent. It's a very large system, iron bridge. It takes about 5 square kilometers, which have several cells, and a few cells are planted with Nufa Ruta. So this is the example how these systems look like. Another system which uses so-called submerged plants. Those are plants which root in the sediment, and the whole plant is submerged in the water, so they do not grow over the surface. There are usually, the plants are usually overgrown by so-called periphyton, which is the assemblage which is mostly based on algae. However, there are some bacteria and some ciliates as well, and they produce a lot of oxygen. So these systems are very much oxic and aerobic, which of course helps to remove pollution. There are two limitations of this application. The first is that these plants grow only in well-oxygenated water. And to tell the truth, the raw wastewater is usually not oxygenated. There is usually very low concentration of dissolved oxygen. And also, because the plants grow in the water, the turbidity of water very much affects the photosynthesis. Therefore, these systems are usually used for tertiary treatment or say post-treatment, where most of suspended solids have already been removed, and also the oxic status of the water can be higher. One example, this is from Florida Everglades. You may know there is the northern part of the Everglades were drained during the 20th century and converted into sugarcane fields, and there is a lot of runoff from these fields, usually rich in phosphorus, which flows south to the Florida Everglades National Park. So in between the sugarcane fields and the park, there is a very large area where the stormwater treatment wetlands have been installed, and they are using this Ceratophyllum demersum, for example. The most common free water surface constructed wetlands are those with emergent vegetation. Those are the most common plants like cattail, Typha, Phremartis australis, and so on. So those are very easy to build systems. They are shallow basins or trenches, usually very shallow, the water level is between 5 and 40 centimeters only in order to provide good oxygenation, and there is no special requirement for the soil. The major role of the soil is just to provide a rooting media for plants. So this is reported the first constructed wetland which was built in the Netherlands in 1967. It's a fully constructed, planted with Schenoplectus lacustris, bulrush, and it has been in operation since and still working very nicely. This is another example. There is a lot of free water surface constructed wetlands in Australia, which are quite often built to treat stormwater runoff, because the most Australia is in arid or semi-arid area, so they try to use the water as much as possible. So they collect the rainwater. They have a special term, the rainwater harvesting for this, and they treat the water or they recycle the water. This is an example of the cold climate constructed wetland in Estonia, in northern Europe, where at the moment the temperatures are 25 degrees below zero. These wetlands still can survive over there because they are usually frozen or they're covered by snow, which provides good insulation. And here is the example of this constructed wetland with floating muds of emergent vegetation, and here is one example from United Kingdom. So there is a basin or trench which is not filled with gravel or sand, but they are using these floating rafts. There are many ways how we can construct these rafts. One of these examples are, for example, these styrofoam artificial floating wetlands, which are artificially planted and then they float on the surface. Then we will move to the second part of the presentation, and we will see some examples of constructed wetlands with subsurface flow, where the most of the treatment processes occur in the rhizosphere of plants. Therefore, these systems originally were called root zone method, because the treatment occurs in the root zone method. The pre-treated wastewater is usually distributed in the zone which is filled with large stones in order to receive a good water distribution, and then the water flows more or less, this is ideal situation, through the roots of the plants, and the system or filtration bed is filled with porous substrate, which is usually gravel or crushed stones. Then we have the plants which help to create conditions for wastewater treatment. They provide some oxygen which diffuses from the roots and rhizomes. The roots provide a substrate for attached bacteria which enhance the bacterial activity, and also there is some even limited uptake by nitrogen and phosphorus. So if we harvest the plants, we can achieve some removal through harvesting of these plants. These systems are usually lined with some plastics, either polyethylene or PVC, and also sometimes covered with geotextile in order to protect the liner. We can see some examples of the small system. So this is the liner, then we put the geotextile, and then we fill it with this gravel. On this picture you can see the most common filtration materials. It's usually washed gravel or crushed rock. This is according the, I would say, norms which are used in our country, 4 to 8, 8 to 16 millimeters. In some countries they use 5 to 10, 10 to 20, But in general, let's say between 5 and 20 millimeters is the most commonly used fraction, and we always use only one fraction. We do not create layers or mixtures, just one layer. Of course, if you have too fine material, then you can expect some, we call it ponding, which is a result of too low hydraulic permeability of the systems. However, if we use these fractions for 8, 16, even sometimes higher, then we can eliminate the clogging problem. Here you can see the distribution zone filled with large gravel or stones, and then is this filtration bed filled with fine gravel. This is the various types of water inflow. We try to distribute the water as evenly as possible across the inflow zone. There are some pipes, or you can have some open channels. This is an even more open channel, or you can use some perforated trough. This is from, for example, from United Kingdom. This is from Spain on the right upper corner, and this is from the Czech Republic in the right lower corner. As I said, there is a very simple structure using which we can maintain the water level in the filtration material, and most commonly we are using flexible hoses hanging on chain or plastic pipes on the chain, so you can easily move the water up and down. And a few examples, there is a lot of on-site treatment systems for 1 or 2 houses. This is for 5 population equivalent in the Czech Republic. Then we have also examples of large systems. This is a tertiary treatment for 25,000 people in Portugal. There is 2 hectares of size in Beja. And this is example of the use of a very cold climate. This is in northern Norway, where the average annual temperature is only 0.7 degrees. But even under these cold climate conditions, these systems work very nicely, because they are usually covered with snow, which provides a very good insulation. They are buried in the soil, so there is an insulation as well. We keep the plants on the surface, also provide the insulation, and there is a very high activity of bacteria, which also provides some heat. So these systems really work year-round. This is another system. This is so-called vertical flow subsurface systems, where we feed the water on the surface, and then the water percolates by gravity to the bottom and leaves the system. In contrary to horizontal flow systems, here we are using layers. Usually the upper layer is filled with larger gravel, because we don't want clogging of this system, because if you clog the surface, there is the end of the system, because the water has nowhere to flow, and the major filtration layer is usually sand, and then we have drainage layers. Here you can see that the water distribution is different. We try to cover as much as possible the whole surface in order to avoid overloading of a certain part of the surface, and also if we don't spread the water evenly, we would not use the whole body of the constructed wetland. So here is the example from Denmark. Next to it, this is from Spain. Here this is from Portugal, and this is from Japan. So there are different ways how we can distribute the water on the surface. However, we should keep in mind that we should cover the whole surface, which is sometimes not easy. A few examples. This is the on-site system in Denmark. So this is the pictures taken in early spring. So you can see the old stems of fragmite is still standing, and new shoots are coming in between. This is the larger system for about 1,200 population equivalent from France. And France is probably the country where they have the most of these systems. They estimate they have about 5,000 or 6,000 of constructed wetlands of similar size. Another country with very high number of these vertical flow constructed wetlands in Europe is Austria, where they use it for smaller system on site, and very common they use it in the mountains for the mountain cottages, and they also have about 5,000-6,000 of these systems in operation. They are also very large systems. This is a picture from Guangdong, the southeast China. It's 25 hectares. It's extremely high. You wouldn't find such large systems in Europe, but China is quite common that they build these so-called eco-industrial parks, and they are using wetlands to treat wastewater. So this is a really very large system using different plants, Canna indica, Thalia, Jalbata, Arundrodonax on the right side, Cyperus alternifolius, vetiver grass, and so on. So there you can use different plants as well. This is a special system, so-called zero discharge system. This is very popular in Denmark and, for example, Estonia. But in Denmark, there are about 3,000 constructed wetlands of this type, and they do not have any discharge. They are designed in a way that during the season where there is no evapotranspiration, the wastewater and the precipitation is accumulating in the system, and then, let's say, from March until October, there is a higher evapotranspiration than inflow and precipitation, and the system is slowly getting emptied. And these systems are planted with willow, Salix liminalis, you can see, and they harvest about half the system every 2 years. So here the tall parts of the willow, they are 2 years old. So it's extremely good growth and very high rate of evapotranspiration. They can evaporate easily 25 liters per square meter per day during the vegetation season. And here is just one example of such a system. You can see they probably harvest the front part, and here is the old part. So there is a good advantage that you do not have the problem with discharge limits, because there is no discharge. As I mentioned, we can combine construct different type of constructed wetlands in order to enhance the treatment efficiency. And these systems are mostly built to enhance the removal of nitrogen, because vertical flow systems, they are very efficient in oxidation of ammonia. However, there is no room for denitrification. So we oxidize ammonia to nitrate and it is discharged. But when we combine it with horizontal flow system, which is mostly anoxic or anaerobic, we can achieve denitrification as well. And to tell the truth, this system is quite old. It was designed by Dr. Seidel in Germany in the 1950s, and she actually used the vertical beds to provide oxygenation of anaerobic water from septic tanks in the, and now we would call it vertical flow beds, and then horizontal flow to remove organics and suspended solids. So this was the original design, which was published as early as in 1965. However, then this system was somehow forgotten, and only the more strict rules for nitrogen discharge in Europe in 1990s does revive these systems again. So here's the vertical flow part, which she called filter bed, and then is a horizontal part, which was originally called elimination bed. And here is some example from real system. This is from Slovenia. They have two sets of vertical flow systems followed by horizontal flow. And just few more pictures. In 1990s, I would say in the late 1990s, in Denmark, they came with the other option for a combination of these two systems, and they put first the horizontal flow bed, where we achieve removal of suspended solids and organics, and the second part is the vertical flow, where we achieve nitrification. And then the water is recycled back, so we have the recycle, which is very rich in nitrate, and we have organics in the inflow, so then we can achieve denitrification in the horizontal flow bed. So there are two options how we can combine horizontal and vertical flow, and this is the first system of the system built in Denmark. You can see the larger horizontal flow bed followed by small vertical bed. But I also mentioned that we can combine any type of constructed wetlands in order to enhance the treatment performance. So this is the white old picture from the conference in 1994. It was actually the first constructed wetlands in China. Now they have several hundred thousand, but here they combine the water hyacinth cells and horizontal flow cell planted with Primaritis australis. This is a more or less experimental constructed wetland in Estonia, where they combine vertical flow system, horizontal flow, free water surface, and the pond. It was the picture before they started the operation, so there is no water at the moment. And this is a very small village for about 300 people, so it's definitely not necessary to build such, I would say, complicated systems for a small village. Here you can see again very large system from China. This is another eco-industrial park, and you can see the combination of vertical flow beds. You can see the close up to the sprinklers, which distribute the water, and the free water surface part. So you can combine different sites. And here this is the very interesting, this is the last picture. This is the so-called butterfly constructed wetland. So you can see here is a butterfly body, head, wings, and sitting on the plant. And this is a system which was built in 2006 in Thailand, in the region which was heavily impacted by tsunami. It was designed by Danish colleagues from University of Aarhus. So they have the vertical part. You can see the distribution pipes on the surface, followed by horizontal flow system, pond, and the free water surface system. So you can also, another example how you can combine different types of constructed wetlands. So in general, to wrap it up, it's possible to say that constructed wetlands are a very suitable option for wastewater treatment, especially in small sources of pollution, small villages. However, you saw in my presentation that these constructed wetlands could be built very, very high. There is usually no necessity of electricity because they are gravity fed, and even the vertical flow systems, which are fed intermittently, of course they can be fed by pumps, but it could be also using some siphon structures. They do not require electricity. The maintenance and operation is very cheap, but the most of the maintenance concerns to pre-treatment, because you have to clean the septic tanks or imhoff tanks or gravel pits and so on. But in general, as compared to conventional treatment systems, there is a very low budget which you have to allocate for maintenance. And these systems are comparable with conventional treatment systems, especially in terms of organics, suspended solids, and also for nitrogen if we use vertical or hybrid constructed wetlands. The removal of phosphorus is usually lower because the major process for phosphorus removal is precipitation with iron or aluminum, calcium, or magnesium. However, if we use a washed gravel or crushed rock, there is usually not much precipitation. However, we can substitute, for example, with limestone or other like waste materials, steel slags or other materials which have very high absorption capacity for phosphorus. However, we need to keep in mind that this absorption capacity is limited. So we will have to replace the filter, for example, after suffering. So that would be from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your long talk. And 지금까지 세 분의
So we have listened to 3 presentations so far, and now we will have discussion with 2 discussants on the 3 presentations. We'll have a 30-minute discussion from now on.
So we have 2 discussants. One is Mr. Kang Taek-gu from KEI, and the other is Choi Han-na from Taeyong Construction. She's the team leader of Civil Engineering Environmental Technology team. And Kang Taek-gu is here via Zoom. And Kang Taek-gu is right now working at the Tsinghua University Research Center and the Yonsei University Research Center. And right now, he is in charge of the North Korean Environment Research team. And Dr. Choi Han-na is working at the Water Quality Planning team and Water Quality Policy team. She's the researcher in these areas for a very long time. Right now, she is the Technology Development Team Leader of the Taeyong Construction Civil Engineering Environment Technology team. These 2 panelists will make a comment or ask questions if they have one. And first, Kang Taek-gu, I'd like to give you the floor. You can make a comment or ask questions to our 3 presenters. Questions? So do you have any questions? Mr. Kang? Yes, you have the floor. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kang Taek-gu from KEI. Because of some personal circumstance, I have to participate via online. I'd like to ask for your kind understanding. First of all, let me express my gratitude to the host for inviting me as a panelist. Professor Hong and the 3 presenters, Ms. Kim and then Mr. Kim and Professor Yan Vaimazal, thank you for your great presentations. If situation allows, I'd like to meet you all in person. The 3 presentations were all very great, and I appreciate your efforts for putting up these great presentations. Thank you. All of the speakers for great presentations. Clean drinking water is a prerequisite for humanity to maintaining their life. Therefore, this is a high priority area when we move on with inter-Korean exchange and collaboration going forward. Let me just focus my talk on the two issues and securing access to drinking water in North Korea. First of all, is that with regard to the water environment of North Korea, two presenters have mentioned the situations of water access in North Korea. Even though there have been some efforts, North Korea still lack access to drinking water. Professor Kim had a research project with two of our researchers into 2020. It was a deep research into North Korea's water resources status. And by conducting such research with Professor Kim, we realized that based on the data coming from North Korea and international bodies, the system and the current status of North Korea's water resources was well understood. But there were still missing parts. We lack understanding about North Korea's water resources, like the bigger system ordinances or the water amount, the access to water, or the level of waterworks system, or the storage or providing capacity of water supply system of North Korea. These are the areas that we need to make some improvement in gathering more accurate data. This is a very important area, but there is still a long way to go for us to have a very sufficient or satisfactory situation. We need to increase some inter-Korean exchange or collaboration so that we can enhance the access and to prevent the recurrences of the water-related accidents or disasters. So we need to improve our collaboration. We also need to make some improvements on the water management in North Korea and water control. So first of all, we need to build more database about North Korea's water management and water control situation. And I also want to mention the inter-Korean collaboration and water resources management. I myself have observed the situation in North Korea, and as was mentioned by Mr. Kim Jin-min. The demands study or demands research is really important if we want to bring North Korea to the negotiating table. We need to understand what North Korea needs in terms of water management. There is this recent report published by North Korea in 2021. It is about sustainable development, the voluntary national review on sustainable development. It is a sustainability free and we have to develop a future project based on the needs identified in this paper. Sustainability is a global buzzword these days, and the sustainability goals have been defined by the UN. North Korea has also accepted these sustainability goals by publishing this paper in June 2021. So we need to develop future projects that can contribute to North Korea achieving these sustainability goals. The first goal in Vienna is sustainable management of water resources. So if we can just derive North Korean demands based on the information in paper, water quality betterment, improvement of water use efficiency, including industrial and farming water, and modernizing infrastructure, and the water level monitoring system building. These are the priority areas that North Korea needs to develop. So we need to take special attention to these areas before developing future project proposals for North Korea. And once we have this presidential election and we have the result, whoever the next president is, we can just develop the project based on this paper, then we can literally start water development projects with North Korea that can contribute to this slogan of this symposium, let the peace flow. So here are my questions. Professor Kim, your presentation was very interesting because it is based on your personal experience. So North Korea, as I've mentioned, submitted a VNR, and based on this VNR, the cities and rural areas, they have this 71% and 45% respectively. These are the rate of population that have access to drinking water. So you have this experience of living in Pyongyang, and you have also visited the rural areas in the smaller cities. Do you think that these statistics are accurate based on your personal experience? That is my personal question, and this is my comment on the presentations. Thank you so much. Yes, you made two comments. Generally, you expressed your agreement to the presentation by Mr. Kim Jin-min, and then you also talked about how to develop future projects with North Korea based on demands of North Korea. And the second part of your comment was a question to Professor Kim. You wanted to know the accuracy of the statistics provided by North Korea. Is it correct? So you want to know the accuracy of the numbers that North Korea has submitted, and if we
The UN report that includes these numbers, I don't think they're very accurate. Of course, they do their best, but considering the situation in North Korea, it's difficult to gain access to accurate numbers or data. So 70%, I think cities, 70% would be rather accurate, but for the rural areas, I think the situation is much more dire than what was described in the report. If you look at or visit the rural areas in North Korea these days, there's still so many households that rely on wells to use water. So I would think that it's less than 45%. So Professor Kim is saying that the numbers for the cities may be relatively correct, but I think the reliability of the data on the rural areas is much less trustworthy. Next, we'd like to ask Chehanna, if you have anything that you'd like to discuss.
Yes, my name is Chehanna, and I'm the team leader of the Civil Engineering Environment Technology team at Taeyang Construction. Thank you so much for inviting me here. First of all, let me express my gratitude to inviting me here as a panelist. Well, I don't have any specific questions to any of the three presenters, but while I read the presentation slides distributed in advance, let me just make some comments because we are behind the schedule right now. I'd like to be very brief. First of all, as you well know, water is very essential resources that is directly related to the survival of the mankind. So to ensure the minimum life quality and human rights of North Korean residents, we have to address this issue first. And as Mr. Kim Jin-min has explained, the inter-Korean collaboration projects, when we start these projects, we have to study demands and needs of North Korea first. But I agree. I think that ensuring access to drinking water should come first. Of course, that's a given, but if we cannot have the wastewater treatment facilities in place, then it would reduce the amount of water that can be provided as a drinking water. So we have to also pay the same amount of attention to the sewage treatment and the sewage treatment facilities. Ensuring drinking water is important, but how to treat wastewater should come together with the water supply issue. I have been studying the technologies for water supply and wastewater treatment, and I'm not expert in guaranteeing access to drinking water, so I will not comment on that. But let me just make comments on how to ensure the installation of water supply and wastewater treatment facilities. I focused on the technology part. Of course, the speaker's comments are right, but let me just add some information to how to achieve these objectives. As Professor Kim mentioned, it is very difficult to have the accurate statistics about North Korea's water resources status. According to some data I obtained a few years ago, there's this research report published by the Ministry of the Environment, even though it is 14 years ago. It is only 35% of the installation rate of the storage system of North Korea in 2008. And this, as of 2010, the waterworks installation rate was just 88%. It is equivalent to the level of South Korea in the late 1980s for the water supply, and as for the sewage system installation rate, it is the level of 1991 in South Korea. So it is more urgent to secure the sewage system in North Korea. If we can just install a more sewage system, then water quality could be improved. Then the improved water quality of wastewater would also increase the amount of water for water supply. So the sewage system should also come together with water supply system to ensure access to drinking water.
With regards to the constructed wetlands for wastewater treatment, yes, that's often used in other countries. But one thing that I wanted to know from the presentation today was how much treatment rate we can expect. What is the treatment efficiency of these wetlands? That would have been very helpful information. In Korea, in early 2010, we did have a lot of research on the constructed wetlands that were conducted. So we looked at different projects, and we did a lot of research on the wetlands, and we in fact constructed many of these CWs. So for wastewater treatment, CWs, well, honestly, they were not very popular. So some are in operation right now, but in Korea, there are a lot of limitations with regards to maintenance and the continuous use of these CWs. So these CWs, their efficiency goes down, and this increases the cost as time progresses. And so many of the CWs had to close down as a result. So in Korea, there's still a lack of understanding on the importance of the constructed wetlands. But as we heard during the presentation, it actually doesn't require much electricity or power. And so in North Korea, it may be applicable, but then I do want to make two suggestions on the constructed wetlands. First of all, in the rural areas, yes, I think these CWs would be very useful because they do not require electricity. So for sewerage and other wastewater treatment, is this applicable? We try to look at that through a Ministry of Environment project we conducted several years ago. So let me focus on that project and share some information. And the CW that we built at that time was composed of the prior treatment filtration process, the VF process, SF process, and then the last step would be to actually produce drinking water. So we used this series for conducting this testing, this research through the project. And the COD reduction or elimination efficiency was about 36 to 40%. And TN elimination rate was about 40%, and TP was at 47%. And so we saw this level of efficiency through our research then. And we could not use only natural materials, and so we had to use some synthetic or artificial materials such as bioceramic, bioreeds, as well as other materials in forming this CW. Thus, we saw this good elimination efficiency. In terms of energy use, yes, these CWs are quite useful, but then in terms of the different materials that can be used, and depending on the seasonality of the region, it does require a huge lot or huge area for operation. So which is one of the limitations that Korea faces. We have a small land mass. And so I think these are issues that we have to look into further if we're going to apply these CWs here in Korea. And the regular harvesting of these vegetation will be very important. And it may lead to some aesthetics related complaints from the residents. And so I do want to give some proposals with regards to the resolving the water issues in North Korea. And so rather than just thinking about the need to the CWs can be used without electricity, I think we need to have more sophisticated approach. Higher energy efficiency CWs and even energy producing CWs are being developed these days, such as the aerobic granular sludge process, the anaerobic treatment processes, and the microorganism fuel cells, anammox, and other low energy or energy producing type of wastewater treatment technologies are being right now. And so it's important for us to try to reach two goals with this single stone, which is to treat water and also secure more water supply. And that could be one alternative that we could consider in the future. So we cannot just focus on the energy or the electricity issue, but we need to have a two-track issue. So for example, for cities or the industrial areas, we could have one type, and for the rural areas, we could have other types of CWs built and operated. So I really look forward to these kinds of different proposals translating to actual inter-Korean cooperation projects in the future. So as a water treatment expert, I think you shared with us a lot of technical information. Please use the microphone for interpretation. So since we heard the translation, Professor V. Mazal, since you heard about the different proposals or the limitations of the constructed wetlands in Korea, can you share with us some information about how we can overcome these limitations of the CWs?
There was a concern or question about longevity of these systems. There are two major points which need loading. We cannot overload the systems. However, we do have experience from the Czech Republic that we have several systems which have been in operation for 30 years with no problems, and the treatment efficiency is more or less the same. It doesn't decrease, it doesn't increase. There were some ideas in the very beginning of this technology that during the maturation of the system, the treatment efficiency will increase. And this is not true. But it doesn't decrease. So it's very stable if we take care about that. The second point, which is very important to mention, that if we build a constructed wetland, we also have to build a sewer system. And of course, differs in various countries. But for example, in our country, the sewer system for the village is usually 4 to 5 times more expensive than the constructed wetland itself. So this is maybe not so expensive to build constructed wetland, but we have to count that we need to build sewer system as well. And concerning the phosphorus, I mentioned that the phosphorus is usually not removed with high efficiency, but in many countries there are no limits for discharging of phosphorus in smaller installations. However, then if we really want to remove phosphorus, probably the best way is a chemical sludge. But in terms of efficiency, in our experience, and I think it's a worldwide experience, in terms of removal of suspended solids and organics, the efficiency is about the same as conventional treatment systems. It's stable throughout the year. In terms of nitrogen, I mentioned that it depends if we want to remove only ammonia, then vertical flow systems are very efficient. If we want to remove total nitrogen, then we would probably need to combine with a horizontal flow system. Then we can achieve 70–80% removal of nitrogen if we combine these two systems. So the general idea, especially in Europe, is to use constructed wetlands in the rural areas for smaller settlements up to 1,000 population equivalent. And we usually use, of course, there is a calculation how we can calculate the surface area, but for horizontal flow systems, it usually comes to 5 square meters per population equivalent. In vertical flow systems, it a little bit differs. For example, in Austria, they use 4 square meters. In Denmark, they use 3 square meters. And in France, they use even less. But in general, I would say between 3 and 4 square meters per population equivalent is necessary if we use vertical flow systems. Therefore, this is the environment limitation. So we cannot build, as I showed in my presentation, these 25 hectares systems in China. So it's not possible to use it in Czech Republic because we don't have so much area available for wastewater treatment. So therefore we use it for smaller sources of pollution, mostly between 200 and 500 population equivalent, which is a very common size of the village in the Czech Republic. So it depends. I'm not sure how is the, I would say, population distribution in North Korea, how the villages, if they are smaller or larger, but this size, I would say up to 1,000 population equivalent is very convenient.
Professor Vaimazal has given a lot of explanation right now, and the CWs have pros and cons, and those were explained by Dr. Vaimazal. And Dr. Chehanna of Taeyong Construction talked about the limitations as it applies to North Korea, and so those are with regards to the technical issues, what is the PE, what should be the area of the CW, what types should, I don't think this is the time for us to decide on those technical issues right now. So in session 1, we looked at the situation in Pyongyang with regards to the residents' use of water from the presentation of Professor Kim Soo-yeon, and Director Kim Jae-min talked about the actual inter-Korean water cooperation projects. And anyone else who would like to add? And Professor Weimazal right now talked about the 500 PE and gave some explanations, but on average, there's a 180 liter of wastewater produced per capita right now. So if it's 1,000 people, it would be about 18,000 tons of wastewater, or much smaller than that. And so because for the rural areas with huge land area, it's okay for them to have the CWs constructed and they would work well. However, for the cities with high population densities, it may not be very feasible. So yes, what Professor Weimazal has explained is that these CWs would be more appropriate in the rural areas with larger land areas, lower population density. Yes, so we appreciate that clarification. And we were able to learn a lot of new information through the discussion today. And Director Kim Jin-min, during his presentation, talked about the future attempts to let the peace flow through the water projects between the two Koreas, and what kinds of cooperations will be necessary, what the direction we should be taking. We need to have continued the discussions about this future, this direction. So I think it's time for us to wrap up session 1. I'd like to invite President Kim to wrap up session 1, and then before we conclude this session, we'll have a photo, and then we'll have a 10-minute break before we go on to session 2. Thank you very much. Here often, and so we're going to have a very special session 2 today. We have 3 presentations and 2 discussants who will be participating in this session. First, we have Professor Bradley Todder of UNIST, who will be giving the first presentation. And he'll be talking about the biopolitics of water, resource, infrastructure, and hydrosocial configurations. So if possible, I'd like to ask the speakers to speak within 20 minutes time limit. So Professor Todder, please go ahead with your presentation.
Great, thanks. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bradley Todder. I'm a professor in UNIST, that's Ulsan Gwagiwon in Ulsan, South Korea. I'm in the School of Liberal Arts. My field is cultural anthropology, which is a social science. So I'm going to give a social science perspective on water and politics today. I call this talk the Biopolitics of Water, Resource, Infrastructure, and Hydrosocial Configuration. And I'll begin by explaining what some of those terms mean and what are the central questions that I'm trying to explore. I'll be looking at several case studies such as the Panama Canal in Panama, the Nicaragua Canal in Nicaragua, Kiki's hydroelectric project in Costa Rica, and the Cochabamba water war in Bolivia. Probably I may have to skip some of these in order to comply with the length of the presentation, but I'll try to cover these. In the social sciences, we try to look at different case studies around the world and compare them to try to find the common problems or issues that need to be addressed. So I'll try to do that with these case studies to draw out some common lessons on the biopolitics of water. And I'll try to make some recommendations from these case studies which could be applicable to developing water as a resource to create peace with North Korea. So I'll begin by taking from the work of Eric Swingado. He is a Belgian geographer in the University of Manchester. He's a professor of geography in Manchester, England. And he said, mobilizing water is a conflict-ridden process. So anytime you use water for human purposes, you create a conflict. So it sounds like a bad news, right, for water and peace, but it's really not, because what we need to do is just look at each case of how the conflicts emerge and look at the actors. If the actors can decide to work together for peace, then it could be achieved, right? So we want to look at the different conflicts and see what kind of ecological relations and social relations were produced in the conflict. And then we ask, well, what kind of ecological relations could produce peace, or what kind of social relations could produce peace? And that's a difficult question, of course, in the context of Korea, which has been divided from one country into two countries and polarized by the Cold War. But we'll try to address it. Now, the concept of biopolitics is, the word comes from the work of Foucault, but it's been developed by other social scientists with the idea that the control of nature is an essential part of controlling humans. So in general, governments and other institutions like multinational corporations, other kind of big organizations, they try to develop knowledge about nature in order to govern humans more effectively. So governance practices are based on forming knowledge of nature. That's the idea of biopolitics. Moving to infrastructure, I'm drawing from the work of Ashley Kars, who is a cultural anthropologist like me. And he said, well, usually we think infrastructure means roads, bridges, dams, airports, and systems. But he said we can think also of nature and natural systems as infrastructure when humans organize the natural system to deliver services for economic activity and development. It's always a socio-physical construction. It involves physical material like concrete, steel, soil, water, and it involves social aspects like laws, regulations that make that construction possible. And these combinations of social and physical elements are produced historically at certain moments in each country's history. Swingido from Manchester, he talks about the hydrosocial, and this involves the combination of ecological and social processes, because you're applying the technology to the materials of nature to produce things that you want, products like water you can drink, fruits and vegetables, manufactured goods like textile or computer chip. But whenever you make a product like that with water, you enable certain outcomes and you enable certain actors to take a benefit, like the farmer, like the person who drinks water, right? But you're also disabling other actors who won't benefit. So there's always the winner and the losers of this hydrosocial and losers, so therefore it's always political. And the public, generally people in the public are more aware of this. So you can even see the TV show like this in the U.S., the Water and Power California Heist, which showed how in California, some people don't even have water for taking a shower or washing dishes. They don't have water in their house to brush their teeth. So you think this is only in North Korea? No, actually even in the USA, there's houses like that. Why? Because water, which is the public resource, has been taken by some big actor, some big agricultural company, took control of the California water supply, right? So when one actor gains more access or control, other actors, like regular consumers, may lose access, right? So this is the kind of problem that we need to look at, right? So this access to water or exclusion from access, when we apply it to the question of creating peace with North Korea through water project, here's the question we need to ask. When we create a project, a water project with North Korea, who will have access to water or control over the hydrosocial cycle? Who will control the cycle? Is a question. And who are going to be the leaders of peace? Who will gain power from it? So peace is achievable if the leaders can gain power. We saw Trump meet Kim Jong-un, right? But they didn't continue the process because they couldn't gain power from it. Peace, not power from conflict. So I'm going to present my case studies, if I can, in the next 10 minutes. So I'll begin with the Canal de Panama. All of my cases are from Central America. So as you know, the Panama Canal is a crucial infrastructure for transport between the oceans. So the Panama Canal is here in the narrowest part of the Central American Isthmus, located between between South America and North America. So it's here, and it connects the Atlantic Ocean with the Pacific Ocean for ships that need to travel between the two oceans. Now, the Panama Canal was built in 1911. Before that, a lot of Americans, during the gold rush, when people were going from New York to Nicaragua, and then go across Nicaragua, and then get on a boat here, and then go to California, right? So someone recently had the idea to make a new canal in Nicaragua, which I'll talk about momentarily. And another country I'll talk about here is Costa Rica. And I haven't been to Panama, but I've done research in Costa Rica and Nicaragua, so these are just some countries that I know well. But returning to Panama, so the Panama Canal connects the two oceans, and it needs enough water for 40 or 45 ships to cross the canal every day. Every ship needs 2,336,396,680 liters of fresh water for each ship. That's equivalent to what 500,000 Panamanian citizens need for their daily water. and this is fresh water. Panama Canal is not salt water like Suez Canal in Egypt. Panama Canal depends on fresh water from the basin that's drained by 6 rivers. So there's a lot of potential for damage to the canal if there's a dry period, a drought, because it does depend on fresh water. Now, this system, it was built at the beginning of 20th century, and it includes 2 artificial lakes, Gatun Lake and Alajuela Lake. These were created by the builders of the canal. They are not natural lakes. And these provide the supply, these lakes provide the supply of fresh water that's needed. At one part of the canal, the ships travel through Gatun Lake, and before that, they travel through the narrow part of the canal. So the 2 aspects of the canal system are the engineered infrastructure and the social infrastructure. The engineered infrastructure includes locks, dams, reservoirs, and the hydrographic stations that were constructed at the beginning of the 20th century. And later, they developed land use planning, environmental regulations, and community-based management as part of the system to provide the fresh water. The engineered system includes the 3 sets of locks which raise the ship from the sea level up to Gatun Lake, which is 26 meters above sea level. They cross the isthmus, and then it lowers, there's locks that lower them back down to the sea level, a process taking about 10 hours. So that anthropologist, Kars, he calls it a freshwater aquatic staircase. And it can be diagrammed like this. So the ships enter these locks, and the locks kind of pull them up to the land level at 26 meters. They sail the picture of the canal lock. You see it has steel doors. The doors close behind the ship, and then water comes up through a culvert. The culvert is a tube that's as big as the subway train. So the Seoul Metropolitan Subway tunnel would be about this big. The water moves through the culvert and then moves up. This is the photo. This is the photo of the lock at the time it was being constructed in the early 20th century. And here you see the aerial photo with the ships waiting for their chance to enter the lock. Now, what about the political and legal and social side? Well, it was developed through the 1903 treaty between USA and Panama. The treaty gave rights to the United States to control the canal zone and the right for the U.S. to take more territory from Panama. So in 1911, the U.S. dammed the Chagres River in Panama and created Lake Gatun. So that means all the farmers had to be removed. All the people living in the house were kicked off of their land. So people in Panama lost their land because of the orders from the United States. And in 1924, they dammed another river and more people lost their land thanks to the executive order of the U.S. president in that year. So basically, the imperial relation by which the U.S., the stronger country, controlled the laws of Panama was part of the governmental system that enabled taking away people's land. The technical system relied on the knowledge of the volume flows and seasonality of the rivers. And with this knowledge, they could measure the efficiency or the capacity of the system through what they call hydrologic reliability. That's the ratio of available water to the amount of water they need for transportation. But it's important to note here that the measurement of efficiency of hydrological reliability is based on international transport, not anything that's going on inside of Panama. So it's the world outside of Panama that's determining what is efficient, how much volume of water is needed. That's from actually Cars's work. In the 1970s, the U.S. agreed to give the canal to Panama, just like Hong Kong was given back to China, right? But now, Panama determined that forests had to be preserved in order to guarantee the water supply, and that means they had to remove, again, more farmers from the land because they think that farmers are harming the forest. Okay, let me try to move forward quickly to the Nicaragua case. So in 2013, the country nearby, Nicaragua, decided to create their own canal, the Nicaragua Grand Canal, with the government of Nicaragua approving a concession to HK Nicaragua company, quickly approved the project without any clear plan for conserving biodiversity or protecting the environment or for mitigating the social impacts. There was also a lack of feasibility, and it suffered many delays and setbacks. In 2018, the investor, Hong Kong and the National Development, closed its business, and because the capital was gone, the plan was indefinitely canceled. Okay. The El Diquis in Costa Rica was supposed to be the biggest hydroelectric project in Central America, the entire region. However, as a side effect, it would flood the territory of several villages, and the inhabitants of the villages are Indians. They're indigenous people. So this is the Teraba people protesting against the dam, which would flood their land and destroy their houses. So the United Nations intervened. And the United Nations tried to set up a mediation process that would give the indigenous people a chance to have their voice heard, as well as to hopefully continue with the dam. However, the indigenous people did not agree. They didn't want their lands taken away or destroyed because their land is of great value to them, more than just economic value. And after already $146 million were spent, they had to cancel the project. Okay, so I don't think I have enough time to cover the water war in Cochabamba, Bolivia, very thoroughly, but I'll just say that it occurred because of pressure from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, which privatized the water supply of the city, and a U.S.-based company led the consortium. So there's a lot of anti-American protests, and people didn't agree to the privatization of the water supply. I'm not going into it enough in detail, but I'm skipping here. So let me summarize the lessons for biopolitics of mobilizing water. In the case of the Panama Canal, it depended on the imperialist actions of the USA to remove the Panamanian farmers from the land. In the case of the Nicaragua Canal, it failed, unlike the Panama Canal. It failed because it relied only on capital investment and ignored the ecology and technical aspects. El Diquis in Costa Rica relied on the idea of carbon zero. Oh, it will succeed because we need carbon zero. We need clean energy. But it ignored the rights of indigenous people. And in Cochabamba, in Bolivia, they imposed market forces where people prefer to rely on family and community. So some lessons that I would derive for creating a peaceful project with North Korea would focus on some issues of control. First of all, North Korean people are very proud of their self-reliance. Juche means self-reliance, right? They're proud that they're different from other countries. And they will not accept any imperialist relation with another country. So you have to avoid any suggestion of imperialist relations when you deal with North Korea. A second point is that you need large-scale capital in order to create a successful project. But capital cannot be the only force pushing the project. You have to have social approval from the people. You have to have other actors involved in the success of the project. And it should be not only technically, but also ecologically appropriate. Finally, who will have access to the benefit? Will it serve the international agents, or can it be useful to the local people? So we heard earlier about some of the problems of people in Pyongyang accessing water, so we would hope that it would be of benefit to regular people throughout North and South Korea. So we would recommend combining the knowledge, technologies, and institutions of North and South Korea for making of the project. Usually governments prefer an ambitious large-scale project, but it should be possible to also think in terms of smaller scale for a positive integration with the natural ecological systems. And finally, the people who have a negative effect from the project should not be ignored. They should also be understood as stakeholders so that some possible benefit can be extended to them as well. Thank you. That's the conclusion of my talk. I appreciate your...
Let me extend my apologies to all of the participants offline and online. So, because we had to speed this session, I forgot to introduce Professor Todder. Professor Todder has been working in Korea since 2006, starting from Catholic University to KAIST, the UNIST. So he has been working in Korea for a very long time. As he introduced himself as a humanitarian anthropologist, he has given us his very unique insight and a valuable perspective. He has introduced the 3 case examples, and based on the case examples, he gave us very valuable recommendations for the North Korean water resources project.
Next, we'd like to invite the editorial writer from 중앙일보, Jang Se-jung, for his presentation on water as seen from the humanities perspective. Editorial writer Jang Se-jung first began working for 중앙일보 in 1993. He was a correspondent to Beijing for 5 years, and currently he is working as the deputy. It's nice to meet you today. I am editorial writer from 중앙일보, Jang Se-jung. So today I will be presenting on my personal view because I don't represent the 중앙일보. I am not the CEO of 중앙일보. So I'd like to thank President Kim Sun-hyun of North Korea Water Society for the invitation, and I'd like to thank Sungsil University and K-Water as well. So I see that the presentations are given mostly by people from the sciences field. So I will be speaking from a liberal arts perspective. So I apologize beforehand before that. I am not an engineer. I did not major in the water resources, the technology side of it, or the engineering side of it. But I do want to share with you my views on water from the perspective of humanities. Water is the origin of life, the source of life. That is my first proposition. As you know, water takes up 70% of the human body, 75% of the Earth's surface, and the water is indeed, or the Earth is indeed the planet of water. As a result, and when the fetus or the embryo is inside the mother's womb, 98% of the amniotic fluid is water. And a ancient Greek philosopher had talked about the basic elements that comprise the world, and Plato and Aristotle also developed this principle further. And aqua, which is one of the basic elements, is water. So it is the source or origin of life. And Kim Dae-jung, during his fasting protest, fasted for 23 days. And if you don't take in food for 3 weeks, you will die. But then for water, if you don't drink water for just 3 days, you're going to die. And so for those of you who are planning on a fasting protest, please remember to at least drink water and salt. So this shows that indeed water is the very source of life. As I was preparing for my presentation, I was quite surprised to know about the different interpretations on the origin of water. So still, there is a lot of debate over where water came from. Scientifically, there is no theory that explains 100% where water comes from. So there is a theory that says Big Bang, which happened 30 billion years ago, was the beginning of water. And so this water, how was this formed in the first place? I mean, there are different interpretations and theories that have been developed. So there's the Big Bang source theory. There's also the meteor theory, asteroid theory, which says that the asteroid had carried water to the Earth. But overwhelmingly, there is no overwhelming explanation on the source of water or where it originated. And so anyone who does discover the scientific theory or scientific reasoning behind the source of water will receive a Nobel Prize. Next, let's look at the properties of water. I talked about Empedocles and his different basic elements theory, and it's much later when water was first identified to be a chemical composition. So now I'd like to talk about the perception of water in mythology and in the Bible. So in mythology, how did people see or perceive water? In China, there is the creation mythology on the opening of the heaven and the earth. And there was a giant named Pango, and this giant had shed sweat, which became rain and dew, and the tears of Pango became the river. And there is the Miao, which is a minority tribe in China, and they have a mythology story on the marriage between the water fairy and the moon. And in Western mythology, Venus, the goddess of beauty, was born from water bubbles in the sea, and Poseidon from the Greek mythology is the sea god. And now let's look at water as described in the Bible. There is the creation of the heaven and earth according to the Genesis, the book of Genesis. And it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So that is creation of the heaven and earth. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God. There's a typo here, so please be sure to correct this typo. I apologize to God for this mistake. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters," and it was so. God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above, from those that were above the firmament, and God called the firmament heaven. So in Genesis, there is a phrase that says, God said, "Let there be light," and he was satisfied with the creation of light. But he did not, there's no direct mention of God creating water. It seems that water existed already before this saying, this statement from God. And so I think this is very interesting description of water. I talked about the fact that we're still searching for the scientific reasoning or explanation behind the origin of water, even in the 21st century. So in the Bible also, the description about water is just indirect. There is no saying or phrase which says that God directly created water. And also in the Bible, there is the story of Noah's Ark and the Great Flood. And it says, since Adam and Eve ate the apple given by the snake, there was some punishment given to mankind through this great flood by God. And so I'm not going to read the whole phrase from the Bible, but the story of Noah's Ark shows that water is used as a medium for judgment from God. Next is the perception of water as is seen from the east versus the west. So in Oriental philosophy, there is a book on 회남자. So it was written by Cho Namji, and it talks about the yin-yang and the 5 elements. And Yu Han is the writer of this book. And there is the principle of the yin and yang and 5 elements, which are water, tree, fire, soil, and steel. Su, Mok, Hwa, To, Gum. Those are the 5 elements that comprise the universe. And so these 5 elements would interact with each other to create the world. And the water is in direct opposition with fire and is in coexistence with or in good relations with tree. And so, because water puts out fire, then they are in opposite ends. And also, in terms of the four directions, north, south, west, east, water is in harmony with tree and spring. And 서백호, which is the west where the sun sets, and the east is where the sun rises, so that's spring. 남추자 talks about the different tastes, and the interesting thing is that the direction of the water is the north. And although I did not write down here, it represents water as well, and water is related to the taste of salt. And so in the middle there is the yellow color. So China often describes it as the yellow country, that is the center of the world. So water philosophy, in terms of philosophy, is interpreted this way through the Oriental philosophy. And on the Korean peninsula, for the Korean people, if you look at the mythology of the foundation of Goguryeo, there is Chumong, and the mother of Chumong is the daughter of the water god. Hemosu also is a father, and they married to give birth to Chumong. So, and the mother here is the daughter of the water god. Now let's look at the perception of water from the Western philosophy. Thales, who is a natural philosopher, has said that the water is the source of all things, and water is a basic element of all things. And so this led to a shift in the perception from a mythical worldview to a scientific worldview of water. And Heraclitus also said that no one can enter the same river water twice. And Heraclitus also said that the source of all things is fire, and said that for water, everything continues to change, and the fact that change is constant is the only thing that doesn't change. And so this principle, he named it as logos. Next, let's look at water as described in the classics. I cannot cover the Western classics here, so I'll be focusing mostly on the Oriental classics and how they described water. I think very highly of Lao Tzu, and so in Lao Tzu's book, Tao Te Ching, or the Book of the Way, there is the phrase that says 상선 약수, which means that the pinnacle of goodness is like water. What this means is that the noble and the purest good, the most beautiful, the best, the most excellent, most ideal, that was Tao, or the way according to Lao Tzu, and this is like water. So if that's the case, what are the virtues or the properties of water that made Lao Tzu describe it this way? So Tao Te Ching, I believe, embodies the wisdom of mankind, although it's a very short book. And if you look at the Book of the Way, well, I think this is the core message that I want to share with you today, which is on the virtue of water. We are here at a meeting hosted by North Korea Water Society, and we have researchers, policymakers who are working on inter-Korean water projects who are participating here. And so I'm hoping that all of the participants will remember this message about the virtue of water as you do your work. So water makes provides benevolence to all things. They do not fight each other, and when they remain on land, it makes it fertile, and they make the heart gentle and provides benevolence in human relationships, and it governs justly and provides capacity, and it allows timely movement, and it doesn't fight, and it has no flaw. So this is the virtue of water according to chapter 8 of Tao Te Ching. And I believe that this is something that anyone who is working on water or water resource issue will have to remember. Chapter 78 talks about the power of water. It says that there's nothing as soft and weak as water, but nothing can beat water in terms of hitting what is firm and strong. And Ibek is an ancient writer who wrote much, was a prolific writer, and he wrote in this book, Changjinju, that the Yellow River flows from heaven and it flows to the sea. And Tubo is a writer from ancient times. In Cheongdu, the poet Tubo had lived at that time, and he had written this poem entitled Chunya Hiu. And the poem goes, a good rain knows the seasons, and it falls during spring. It flows with the wind and comes quietly and dampens everything quietly. And so it makes everything prosperous, but it doesn't make itself shown or doesn't boast about its this ability that it has. So that is how Tubo had described water. Next, let's talk about water and human civilization. As you know well, the 4 human civilizations originated from the water areas. In Kuju, from the Shilla area, that was the jurisdiction area where this Shilla civilization first began, and that was a water area, and it's natural because agriculture was very important at that time. Next, I'd like to talk about water and war and peace. So I'd like to talk about the revolutionary nature of water from the classics. We have Sun Tzu, who talks about the water in his book Monarchy. It says the monarch is the ship or the boat, and people are the water. And the water can float the ship, but also can subvert the boat. So it is very embracing. Water is very embracing, but also can be turbulent at times. In terms of flooding and flood control, now let's talk about some examples from the past. After King Yo and Sun, there is the Emperor Mu, who ruled for some time in China. And there were a lot of floods that happened under this emperor's rule. And Emperor Wu's father was Kun, and he worked for a long time to solve this flood issues, and he was eventually eradicated. But I think his failure stems from the fact that he tried to stop the waterway, the flow of the water. But his son, the Emperor Wu, tried to control flood in a way that provided the water a path to continue to flow. So let's just change the direction of the water flow. And he was quite successful with this flood control measures, and this emperor eventually began to continue to rule China for a long time. And in the ancient times, there were a lot of fights that occurred because of the lack of water. And in the ancient times, agriculture was so important was that if there is flood or there is drought, then people would think this is due to the lack of virtue on the part of the emperor. And so the emperor would have to do rituals for praying for rain. And then there were many cases of water leading to war. And we are talking about the Suez gates or the inlets. In Korean, it's called mulgo. And this mulgo, this Suez, is a waterway which leads towards farmlands. And I was born in Jinju, below Mount Chiri, and my family was in farming when I was younger. And so having a waterway created to flow to farmlands was very important. And the water would have to flow naturally from the highland farms to the lowland farms. But the problem arises when there is drought, because this Suez or this water inlet would be critical to survival. And so all of the farmlands were connected, but those farmlands in the upper side, they would stop or block the water way, the Suez, and the farmers in the lower area would engage in revolt because they were not being provided with water from the uplands. And there is a saying, there's a proverb that says, the fight over water Suez knows no brothers, which means shows the severity of this issue. And Malaysia became independent in the 1940s, 50s, and the water produced in Malaysia is shared very well with Singapore. So water obviously can lead to peace as well. And also between North Korea and China, there was an agreement between the two countries on sharing the water from the rivers. And now I'd like to talk about water and the future of humanity before I conclude. As you know well, we are faced with the climate crisis and many natural disasters. And in 1995, at the Rio meeting, March 22nd was declared as a Global Day of Water. According to the World Resources Institute, it says 17 countries and 2 billion people from 17 countries are suffering from water shortage. And by 2025, Korea will become a water scarce country. North Korea already is a water scarce country. Among 164 countries, it is 69. And I also talk about the water explanation of mankind. So ultimately, I tried to talk about water from the humanities perspective, talking about the war and peace over resources and how it is described in the different classics. But water is the origin of life, and any attempt to monopolize this water resource is bound to lead to crisis and conflict. And so we have to find ways to share water resources, and the virtue of water, as I described earlier, the fact that it provides benevolence to all things. That is what we have to keep in mind as we try to approach the issue of water and water resources cooperation between the two countries. And so that is going to lead us to letting the peace flow, letting the peace water flow. Yes, thank you very much. Water is something that we use on a daily basis, but I didn't know that there was so much philosophy and wisdom behind this water. So earlier, we did hear through Professor Todder's presentation also, but I think water and water control or flood control are very important tasks that all countries face. So that was emphasized also in this presentation. Lastly, we'd like to go on to the presentation by Lee Jae-seok.
He is the headmaster of DMZ Ecology Peace School, and he will be delivering a presentation on the water that gives life. Headmaster Lee Jae-seok is a CEO of Paju-e서, which is a newspaper cooperative. He has published 2 books in 2010 and 2016 about Injin River. And as you can see from his writings, he knows how to write. And not just a good writing skill, he has a very deep philosophy that can touch many people's minds. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lee Jae-seok. As was introduced, the compliment that the moderator has just given me makes me lost for words. Well, my presentation topic is water and peace. I'd like to focus on river water. I am living near Injin River. So when I talk about Injin River, I can touch upon this issue of water and peace. I believe that Injin River is the river of division. But after hearing the presentations, I now change the concept. It is not a river of division, it is a shared river. It changes our perspective when we see Injin River, when we talk about potential unification of the peninsula. Paju Publishing City is also located near the river, the place where Han River and Injin River meet. And this is why this place is called Kyoha. This means this intersection or an encounter of rivers. This is the biggest Dumulmori. Dumulmori means that 2 rivers meet. And I believe Injin River is a very special river because 2/3 of it goes through North Korea and the remaining 1/3 flows through South Korea. So it flows from North Korea to travel through South Korea, where it meets Han River. And it forms boundaries between North and South Koreas. So the DMZ cuts across the Injin River twice. This is the background information about Injin Place for transportation, where people travel. The Injin River was written in the ancient historic Stone Age. And when we look at the ancient history, like 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, where Gojoseon ruled, we have this. You can find Goindor remains along Injin River, and other ancient tombs. Stone Mound tomb is also discovered along Injin River. This shows that Injin River has been used as the route of transportation throughout the ancient history, or throughout the entire history of Korea. And during Goryeo and the Joseon era, the capital of Goryeo, Kaesong, and Hanyang, the capital of Joseon, Injin River is located between the 2 capitals of Goryeo and Joseon respectively, serving a very important role during those times. So this is the river where our civilization prospered When the river was frequently used, civilization prospered, and the river was not in use, civilization was halted. Because Indian River is located at the center of the Korean Peninsula. So if you look at its geographical location, it starts at the central part and then it goes through the Korean Peninsula to go out to the West Sea of the peninsula. So geographically, it is very well situated, and without going through Indian River, you cannot go to any place of the Korean Peninsula. And this very important river has been disconnected for the past 7 decades. And during the 70 years, Indian River was heavily covered in 2009 when there was a sudden flood, which killed 7 campers in South Korea. That day, there was a torrent or a heavy rainfall in North Korea, and North Korea discharged water without a notice. So the campers who were camping near Indian River were killed by this sudden flood. If there had been just a simple notice, these 7 lives would have been spared. Of course, we have to consider the icy relationship between the two Koreas, but this just reminded us clearly that Indian River is not just a natural river, it is a river of disconnection. Back then, South Korea was building Gunnam Dam, which caused the controversy because it's very close to DMZ. It didn't have any big capacity to store water, and it can just provoke North Korea. That was the concern. But after this incident that killed 7 campers, now people started to support the building of Gunnam Dam because it can help South Korea to take counterattack to North Korea whenever North Korea discharged water without notice. So Gunnam Dam is also the result of the Cold War, rather than to serve the purpose of storing water or control or managing water. So let me introduce a novel titled Lim Jin-gang, written by a North Korean writer. It was also published in South Korea as well, and the storyline follows a young couple who was separated, and the wife who was living in North Korea cannot leave her hometown because she wants to be reunited with her husband. And let me just read off from that novel. That what will happen to Lingang Wetland and Yeoncheon Wetland? Before the ceasefire line was drawn, Indian River was one flow and we had one wetland and one waterway. What if we build a pumping station bigger? All peasants wanted to do that. So the foundation for the pumping station got bigger and bigger generator and the pump arrived. The sign said, Unification Pumping Station. This describes the project for a pumping station which mobilized the North Korean residents nearby. It was to control and manage water so that South Korean people can also benefit. But the known result within the novel is that this dam or pumping station did not help farmers in South Korea. It just gave damage to the South Korean people. So unlike or against the wishes of the North Korean people and against the wish of the wife who has her husband in South Korea, this pumping station just gave death to the South Korean people. against its intended purpose. And I think this resembles or mirrors the reality between the two Koreas. There's another story before the ceasefire line was drawn. The ceasefire line was so artificial. One house was divided by the ceasefire line, so the northern room has become North Korea and southern room has become South Korea. And there's this very famous Yeonbaek plateau or Yeonbaek field which produces much crop. And those living in most of the field belong to South Korea, and the reservoir or the water reservoir that provided water to the field that belonged to North Korea. So North Korea just cut water supply to Yeonbaek field. In response, South Korean peasants or farmers, they formed a delegate and then try to have negotiation with the North Korean authorities. This is the real story. And Donghwa Daily covered the story in May 20th, 1950. With North let the water flow, Yeonbaek farmers held an assembly and sent their representatives while making an appeal to the government. The representatives are having an unofficial negotiation with the North Korean authorities. That is a part of the article. The government-to-government negotiation did not take place. They didn't have any trust toward each other, and they were in confrontation. So they didn't provide any solutions. So urgent farmers, they formed their own delegates themselves and sent the representative to North Korea for negotiation. What should be noted here is that South Korean government turned a blind eye to this very strange negotiation because they couldn't stop the negotiation, even though they cannot be leading this negotiation either. But after the Korean War, most of the Yeonbaek field just went back to North Korean territory. With this, all of the efforts were in void, and the problem was just solved without having any negotiation. So in the novel Lim Jin-gang, North Korean farmers, they wanted to send water down to South Korea, and the farmers in Yeonbaek field, they wanted to have a negotiation with North Korea without the approval of the government, even though they believe that North Koreans are just a bad communist. And I believe that this is because water resources are beyond ideology or the political confrontation. Water has to flow. And making water flow is an urgent need for farmers and ordinary people. All of these episodes or stories that were before the Korean War, and after the Korean War, as time goes by, the stories of the surrounding the boundaries have just disappeared, and now we are taking these divided realities as realities. And I don't think that this inter-Korean issue is an issue of individuals. It is an issue of politics. And individual negotiations or individual exchanges cannot take place between the two Koreas. It can only happen within the bounds allowed by the two governments. Water is supposed to flow from north to south. But there's no official negotiations between the two Koreas, especially after the Kaesong Industrial Complex is shut down. So all of the activities or exchanges that cross these boundaries have just disappeared these days. So this very visceral response of the patterns of living in boundaries, like the North Korean farmers believing that they have to send down water to the south, and South Korean farmers believe that they have to be in the negotiation to get what they want from North Korea. These farmers' beliefs are more effective than the government's official response to this shared water resources. But the government is not making any response that can address this daily needs of the people regarding water resources. And whenever I see Indian River, I find that Indian River goes through the cliffs, and then it goes down to form waterfall. And there's this very big plain above the cliff. So the water goes through the field and then goes down the cliff to form waterfalls. So you can see many waterfalls along the Indian River. It is a semi-artificial waterfall only during the farming season. This is a very unique scene you can see only in Indian River because of the geographics. Of course, I'm living here, so whenever I take a look at how Indian River flows, those waterfalls are surely spectacle. But you cannot see any grass under the waterfalls. There's no green near waterfalls. The crops and the grass, they can grow only in the horizontal space in paddy fields. Paddy fields are horizontal, not vertical. So I came to realize that what grows life is horizontal water, not vertical water. And this is a very deep lesson that you can learn from how water flows. And if I take a closer look, the horizontal plane is not entirely horizontal. You can see there is a differences in height, like they are forming steps or stairs. So even though it looks horizontal from afar, if you take a closer look, there is a difference in height that facilitates the movement or flow of water. Of course, if it is entirely horizontal, then water cannot flow. There should be some differences in height. There should be some vertical movement as well. So what grows water relies on vertical movement along with horizontal movement as well. So vertical movement has to be combined with the horizontal movement to truly grow life. And this same laws can be applied to inter-Korean relationship. The vertical movement can prompt a change, and horizontal movement can hold life or change. I think this is what we can derive. This philosophy can be drawn from how agriculture can be made. And all of the river water flows down to the ocean. The ocean is the ultimate destination of river flow. And this such movement of water, we can draw various philosophies from the movement of water. The water in the ocean, that is not the final destination of water. This is a given. After reaching oceans, the water perspires to become vapor. They soar to the sky, and then they move along with the flow of air, and then they become raindrops to have this vertical movement again. They fall down to the earth. Well, I cannot explain what I feel from the movement of water accurately, but we can learn a lot of philosophical thoughts from how water moves and form this very grand circle of life. The inter-Korean exchange is not being made along the boundaries of the two Koreas, but this should happen. And to facilitate such exchanges, we have to think about how water moves. So let me go back to the novel, Limjingang. It is set in Lingang village, and her husband has been left for Yeoncheon intersection. Even though it is a fiction, it is set against the real places. And in the same exact locations, during Joseon area, they have this very entertaining excursion. In October 1740, in the Limjin River, at Uhwajeong, a boat started an entertainment journey which involved a famous painter and poet of the Joseon area. It was inspired by Sodongpa's excursion in China. So in the same Insu year, they started this excursion. The poet wrote a poem, and Chongsan, the famous painter, painted a drawing, very famous drawing, which is a cultural heritage of Korea. And the destination of this excursion is the place that appeared in the novel Limjingang. So 200 years ago, 200 years before the novel, these famous writer and painter, they went through the same route of the route that appeared in the novel Limjingang. So let me just read from the novel. The sunset over Limjin River died down. Under the blanket of night, the river flowed heavily over the frozen river water. Waterbirds wept while flying their ways. Cold wind blows snow flower into the garden of the lady's house. That was how Limjin River was described in this novel, Limjingang. But if you look at the records of the excursion 200 years ago, Limjin River was described differently. While looking down to the deep cave, we discovered the beauty of the sun and the moon and the silky sand that glittered. We saw all these splendid spectacles here. Where else we can find this sublime beauty? As we sang a song together on the boat, waterbirds soared up in droves. So the description 200 years ago is light and cheerful. Even the same bird act differently. In novel Limjingang, waterbirds wept sadly. But in Ujeokbyeokbu, which was written 200 years ago, the same waterbirds soared up, hopefully. I think the ceasefire line has changed the mood surrounding Limjin River. But I don't think that the Limjin River could be so different. So I just combined the descriptions of these two and found the middle way. It goes like this. The sky and the earth are expansive, and the world is in void space. So there is no division between river and mountain and wind and the moon. The sun rises higher, and the river carries the sun flowing down to the south. So this forms a very neutral atmosphere surrounding Limjin River. It is not too tragic or it is not too positive. Even though 70 years is a very short amount of time for nature, it can be a very long time for humans. But river, it flows throughout the time. Sometimes it remains silent and calm, and sometimes it is very violent and turbulent. So just describing only one aspect of Indian river would not be an accurate description of how the river flows. we just take different perspectives depending on the historical circumstances of the time. So I hope that I don't think that the 70 years of time would be long enough to control the movement of Indian River. It would not define the Indian River. Indian River would just stay the same, regardless of the historical situation or political situation of the mankind. So water has to flow from higher place to lower place. And if it reaches lower place or horizontal place, it gathers. And then, if it has reached the lowest place, it will soar up to the sky, forming a circle of life. So when we talk about peace like a river, we have to think about this circle of life. And if another Insu-nyeon or year of Insu arrives in 2042, then in October at the same date, I hope we would be able to start another excursion at Uhajang in Indian River. That is my wishful thinking. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for your speech about Indian River, and especially when you talked about this vertical and horizontal movement and the combination of the two to facilitate the flow of water. It was very inspiring. Then we'd like to start discussion.
We have two discussants. The first is Jung Jun-hee, who is the head of the Inter-Korean Cooperation Zone Development Planning Team at the Ministry of Unification. In 1992, he first began working for the ministry, and so it's been 30 years now since he has been working on unification issues. So he held the position of spokesperson of the ministry, and currently he is heading this development planning team. Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by thanking you for the invitation to this North Korea Water Society symposium. Unfortunately, or I apologize for not knowing that North Korea Water Society is engaged in these activities, even though I am working at the Ministry of Unification, and I promise you that I will give more interest to this meeting and the society in the future. I think we have a very broad spectrum that we are discussing at the symposium. We are talking about the technology and the engineering side of North Korea water issues, as well as the humanities and liberal arts perspective as well. There are two types of studies in the world. The first is a study of the self, and the second is a study of others, of the world. So there are two different types of learning that happens. The presentation by Professor Todder was a learning about the world and how this can be translated into policies for water supply, water provision. And the two other presentations were about learning about the self. And so I feel that on the issue of water and peace, all are very important presentations. The three implications from Professor Todder's presentations, I agree fully with those. The position and the voice of the recipient should be considered, first of all. And secondly, without massive scale projects, it will be difficult to have practical sharing of the benefits. Thirdly, there has to be consideration for those who are disadvantaged or who suffer the damage from these kinds of projects. And on the two presentations by the Korean speakers, well, I do appreciate the different interpretations about water, but on the virtual water, the fact that water just flows to areas where people refuse to go or people have disdain, I think that's very important for me. And as the principal Lee has mentioned, the vertical difference ultimately leads to a horizontal flow, and vertical and horizontal, it seems, are both necessary. Everything has to harmonize, which will allow prosperity to happen. So I agree with those assessments. Since I'm a public official, I'd like to talk about the practical aspects of inter-Korean water cooperation. Water represents peace, yes, but on the other hand, it also causes a lot of war. And sometimes when I have time, I read or watch the National Geographic documentaries. And in fact, there's a lot of killing that happens along the waterway, along rivers. So there is a lot of fighting and bloodshedding, which we can see often happening in the water system. So in fact, water has led to a lot of wars among peoples from Mesopotamia to Asia, in the Mekong River, in the upper streams. There are a lot of attempts at monopolizing the water resources there, and developing solutions has become very difficult. It's the same for inter-Korean relationship as well. The transboundary river has become a major issue between two countries. In 2004, there was an agreement on the Indian River, and there have been many different efforts put in place to promote this issue, but we still have a long way to go. And so on Indian River water resources management, we've had dozens of meetings, or about 6 different meetings. We had reached agreements, but unfortunately they were not sustainable. And someone in session 1 had mentioned about the yield, or the demands from both sides. And from North Korea, they have very clear demands from us. First is information exchange. So in 2009, accident had occurred as a result of lack of information exchange. And so we need to systematize information exchanges between the two Koreas. And for that, we need to have measuring points agreed between the two sides, and there has to be some logistical exchanges that happens as well, and that's going to lead to systematization of the relationship as well as sustainable relationship. And so we still have a long way to go. And also to resolve the North Korean water-related problems, as we heard earlier, well, this water issue should lead to practical inter-Korean cooperation. So this has to include all aspects, including forestry, wider water resources issues as well. And so right now the talks between the two countries are stalled. However, we have to ensure that we will carry on these discussions in the future. And September 2018, Kim Jong-un had requested Mayor Park of Seoul City to improve the Taedong River water quality, and I was quite surprised to see that Kim Jong-un knew about the water quality of Taedong River. So this is about water quality problems, water pollution, and so water pollution issues are another area that we need to deal with together. Lastly, we have a bigger issue at hand. We're just thinking about the land. So we're talking about rivers, streams mostly. However, we have to consider the seas as well in dealing with water resources issues. As you know, the Northern Sea ice is melting more rapidly, and so there are meetings on the Northern Sea route. and we are also participating as a direct party. And China is also trying to raise its voice. And in the Baltic Sea area, in East Sea area, there are a lot of show of force by China happening right now. And so it's important for the two Koreas to cooperate on these seas related issues as well, as we emphasize the inland water systems cooperation as well. And of course, the path ahead is not going to be easy. We talked about horizontal and vertical cooperation earlier, but I think this kind of efforts will require both our emotions as well as our reasoning or rationality as well. We have to ensure that both our mind and heart are put together to lead to actual results. And so all of these things should harmonize together, vertical, horizontal, the humanities and natural sciences, policies, as well as the mind and the heart. All of this should be integrated together in our approach to inter-Korean water cooperation. And I hope that North Korea Water Society will be more successful in its endeavors in the future. With this, I will conclude my comments. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Jung Jun-hee.
Now I'd like to move on to the second panelist, Lee Kyung-hee from KEI. As you can see from the paper, she worked at the Korea Exim Bank and Korea Environment Institute. She is also giving classes about the water politics of North Korea, which is the topic that was covered by Professor Todder. Now, I'd like to invite Ms. Lee Kyung-hee to the floor for a speech. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to this interdisciplinary symposium. The scope of this topic was very wide and diverse. So let me just make a comment on the presentations of session 2. The concept of biopolitics explained by Professor Todder. Well, explained the concept very well. It is about controlling natural resources and how to govern the natural resources to rule people with the resources. When the Kim Il-sung solidified his power, I think the hydropolitics played a very big role. Botong River, they had this repair construction works over Botong River. They mobilized the people. And if you look at the records back then, this repair works over Botong River was described as new revolution for North Korean people. And the construction site was recognized as revolutionary site, which is still being memorized whenever there is an anniversary. They are using water, and by mobilizing the people, they have solidified their power over water. When we look at the biopolitics of water in North Korea, who controls and governs water resources? Of course, the state governs and controls water resources in North Korea. And if you look at the methods of the governance, the ruling party, the People's Party of North Korea, they have the entire power, and the Department of Industry and Department of Agriculture, they have this divided power of water resources based on the purpose of this water. They are using water to control and rule over North Korean residents. So water is a method of control in North Korea. And if I just borrow this lens of biopolitics to explore ways of potential a collaboration project. There was a time North Korea asked for support or aid from the international body. So UNICEF started to help out North Korea, and in 2004 and 2006, even though there was conflict between international body and North Korea, UNICEF remained in North Korea to fulfill its commitment toward North Korea over water resources. If you look at the behind of these incidents, is that they tried to approach North Korea more horizontally, and they embraced the purpose and interest of the North Korean people and authorities. That is how they maintained their collaboration with North Korea, even under conflict. Based on this, we have to define our approach toward North Korea when we try to have collaboration with North Korea over water resources. Another point that I want to make is that after hearing the speech by Jang Se-jung and the information about Indian River, since I'm the last one to speak, let me just be very brief. So he mentioned the climate crisis. Of course, this is a very controversial topic. I think that the first war in humankind was triggered by climate change. That was the record or discovery made by France. And the Sudan-Darfur conflict, it was also a war caused by climate change, as was pointed out by former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. So the water issues and climate change issues, they caused these wars throughout history. And if you look at more recent documents or records, and if you look at statistics, climate change takes up about 30% of the reasons for war throughout humankind. That is the discovery made by Stanford University. So based on their discovery, if the temperature rises 2 degrees Celsius, then the possibility of conflict increases by 13%. And if you just apply this to the Korean Peninsula, on average, there is temperature rise of 1.8 degrees Celsius. And if we reach the late 21st century, then the climate change will increase conflict by 5.6%. North Korea is a vulnerable country when it comes to water resources. So if the temperature rises 5.6 degrees Celsius, then the possibility of conflict or confrontation would increase by 40%. So not just the traditional sense of security, we have to take one step further. In a non-conventional way, water should be leveraged and discussed to bring peace on the Korean Peninsula. That is what I believe. Even though we haven't had a violent conflict over water up until now, but there's a high potential that we would have some violent confrontation over water resources. And I believe we have made some efforts to have collaboration over water resources. Former President Nomuyan also had some discussions over water collaboration with North Korea. After having a summit, there were a talk to provide the water resources to the vulnerable or underprivileged people in North Korea. So there were small attempts to have some collaboration with North Korea to form partnership over water resources. So I think this is the direction we have to be headed in the future. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for your remark. So we have 7 minutes left. Would it be better for us to give the floor to Professor Todder first? So Professor Todder?
Certainly. I definitely thank the panelists for their favorable mention of my talk, and especially Mr. Jong, he brought up the issue that often that water leads to war rather than peace. So I think we do need to study these issues further in order to look for good outcomes in the Korean Peninsula. And for Mrs. Yi, I think that she elaborated very well from the topic of biopolitics that I only partly raised, that this is an important kind of optic for looking at how governments practice their daily business of government. And water is really a key to the way they practice their daily business of governing people. In the first presentation from Mrs. Che, and then she talked about the daily life of the Pyongyang people and how water availability governs their daily activities and what they can or cannot do, or the possibilities that they face. So clearly the ways that governments can benefit from providing water, but not only that, but can we arrange for them to make water more available to more people? It's a crucial issue, and I think they both brought a wider perspective. So I thank them for that.
Yes, thank you. What about our two other presenters? Anything that you want to add? Well, if not, yes, maybe we can go on to the closing session. Now, I really learned a lot from this session too. The different principles, theories behind the origin of water, the different wisdom and understanding of water, as well as it was an opportunity for me to think about the fact that oftentimes we don't really think much about water, but there's not much good expressions about water. That water is used in a negative, with negative nuances more often than not. It seems so. So in Korean, there's a saying, when the water comes in, that's when you should row the boat. And there are some neutral definitions. However, there are a lot of good definitions about the river, on the other hand. So it seems that in sessions 1 and sessions 2, I think there were important keywords that emerged: life and peace. So whether we take a natural science perspective or a humanities perspective or approach, I think the two keywords would be life and peace when it comes to water. So water is indeed a source of life and peace for humanity. And so North Korea Water Society, which is dealing with these important concepts, are playing an important role. And with that pride in mind, we'll be concluding this session. Thank you. If you look at our program, you will see that we have a general discussion and a closing session at the end part. But in fact, in terms of the discussions, we already had very good discussions at the end of sessions 1 and 2. And so I don't think we needed to really take time to summarize what was discussed over the past several hours at this juncture. And I believe that we already had ample exchange of ideas through the 2 sessions already. So I'd like to go on to the closing. In fact, for me, this was an opportunity to learn much as well. And as Mr. Jung-jun, he has mentioned, it seems that our spectrum has been set too widely. I mean, we're dealing with a very huge topic, and so it has both pros and cons. So the next time, in our next symposium, Well, I have an engineering background, so next time around maybe we could just focus on the liberal arts perspective or approach more. And I was listening to what Mr. Jang Se-jung was presenting, and I was thinking that it would be good if we could explicate on what he was discussing during his presentation further during our next symposium. So the next time we will make sure to find a warmer venue. It's a bit cold here. And from UNIST, we have an organizer, Dr. Choi Jin, who was instrumental in organizing this event. So on behalf of Professor Cho of UNIST, any closing remarks that you would like to share with us?
So please give a big round of applause to Dr. Che and the lady sitting next to her from UNIST. These two people were very vital in organizing this symposium. Please give a big hand. And there are other people who have worked so hard to put together this symposium. Please stand up from your seats. Thank you so much for your hard work. I'd like to conclude today's symposium here. Presentation slides and materials. I would like to have some book to be distributed to all of the participants. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you.